Hello everybody and welcome into my latest live computer build video. Today it is Friday, TGIF. It is August the 5th, 2022. My name is Kerry Holzman and I have made some more modifications to the audio and video. So we'll see. I'm very curious what your feedback is, specifically with the audio. The audio should be much improved. However, I need to verify, so please let me know. Also, I have turned off the DVR mode because it's been creating some confusion where people in the chat room are watching 20 minutes behind, and that was creating a problem. So I went ahead and disabled DVR mode so it forces all viewers to be at the very current point of the live video. And if they're joining late and they want to see what they missed, they can go back after the video is done and YouTube is processed. Because what's ending up happening is they're going back and they're addressing some things that happened 20, 30, 40 minutes ago in the video and leaving comments in the chat room. And it's really, really confusing for me. So we're going to try this and see how it works. I enabled the DVR mode because people would come in an hour into the video, say, what did I miss? Or what are the parts you're using? And I'd say, rewind the video and you'll see what parts. We've already done that part. I hate to keep repeating myself. It's sort of like when a student were to walk into a classroom late. It's irritating to the teacher because the teacher doesn't want to repeat everything for the 27 other students in the classroom that were there. And so I've had teachers that said, you know, if you're more than 5 minutes late, don't even come in. So that's about what it's like. So we're making a few changes to see how this all plays out. And I'm going to continue to fine tune things until I can get it dialed in for what's working best. So right now you see I've got the pretty good lighting and color and everything off of the XF705. I think I've got the audio dialed in pretty good, but we'll see. My concern is whether or not the volume level tends to go up or down, because I've put one part of it on automatic, and that may or may not be good. So we'll find out what you guys think. Thank you always to Peter Laycock. Peter kicks us off with a 50-pound contribution in the super chat. Thank you, Peter. Peter says, good evening, Kerry and everyone in the chat. All the best from Bonnie, Scotland, where the temperature in Edinburgh is 60 degrees Fahrenheit or 16 degrees Celsius. Well, Peter, the temperature here in Phoenix, Arizona, where it is unusually humid, well, it's August, it's always humid in August. It is 1 o'clock in the afternoon and 99 degrees Fahrenheit. And as we climb up in the day, we'll climb up in the temperature till about 5 o'clock, and then it'll finally start to come back down. So it's another hot one, what I wouldn't give to be in 60-degree weather. Peter, I got your message, and yes, 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 I absolutely, I'm going to send you the Train PC case. You know, I've been holding on to that Train PC case for a long, long time, looking for the right person, and I really, really want to do this for you, so I don't want you to pay for it. Let me send it to you. I don't have any plans for it other than I was just holding it, waiting for the right person. And I couldn't think of anybody better. Like, if there was anybody else, you are the ideal person for that case. And for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, several years ago, I bought this Leon Lee computer case that looks like an old steam train. And Peter works on trains. And, you know, it never occurred to me. Trust me, if that had occurred to me, I would have just sent it to you without a thought. But now that you mentioned it, oh, that is perfect. And, you know, it's just sitting around collecting dust with no plans. So this just fits like the perfect puzzle piece. It's awesome. And I'll try and get that out, not next week, but the week after. But since I'm going to be at Studio A next week, I will get it boxed back up and get it all dusted off. I think it still has the power supply in it, but it doesn't have anything else. please let me know if there's anything else. I mean, I'll build it for you if you want. So, but please let me do this for you. I so want to. And thank you for all your generosity, Peter. Thank you also goes out to Craig Casabona with a $20 Super Chat contribution. Thank you. Thank you to Craig. And then just before the broadcast, an Amazon gift card had come in from David Everett. So I should put my glasses on. So thank you to David Everett as well. So again, my appreciation for the contributors who are making it possible for me to get better quality equipment, make more videos, do more reviews. And it's because of the folks like the ones I've mentioned and many, many others who make the possibilities of what I'm doing here. There's far more possibilities and far more videos I can do because of them. So if you see any of these folks in the chat, you know, please let them know. Please say thank you, because they're a major reason why I'm able to do a lot of what I'm doing. So, speaking of which, we're doing another computer build today that's going to be very, very similar to what I've been doing a lot of lately. And it's simply because I have an existing inventory and I've been on a mission to get it all out the door. So this gentleman named Randy out in Missouri contacted me and he wanted a $600 build, but he wanted 32 gigs of RAM and Wi-Fi. Normally, there's nothing wrong with putting 32 gigs of RAM on an i5, but it just seemed like if we're going to do 32 gigs of RAM and you're going to add the Wi-Fi, you're adding an extra $50 for each 16 gigs of RAM, and you're adding an extra $50 for the internal Wi-Fi card for Wi-Fi 6 with Bluetooth. So we started talking, and we kind of got 3/4 of the way to basically an ultimate build. And I just thought, this is really, really a shame to stick with a budget NVMe drive when we're going 32 gigs of RAM and an 11900K processor, which was Intel's previous flagship processor for consumers. And I said, look, let's just make this let's just, whatever it takes. We're gonna put a Samsung 970 EVO 2 terabyte drive in because it's significantly faster than the Intel drive. So it's just kind of amusing to me that what he initially asked for was a budget build, but what he really wanted and what he could really use was more of a higher end build, something that he could hold on to and grow into for a long time. And he was a little hesitant because of what the cost was coming to. And so I sweetened the deal a little bit so he couldn't, I made him an offer he couldn't refuse. And so that's what we're gonna build today. We're gonna get the motherboard prepped. Obviously, the 11900K, which is right here, the Samsung 970 EVO Plus, which were recently on sale. So that's not as big of a loss for me and the deal I made him. Of course, the Scythe Mugen 5, as always. I use the Fenvi AX3000. This is also Bluetooth. These work really, really well. The price has recently gone down on these. Everything I source from Amazon. For the RAM, of course, the Vulcan Z TFORCE RAM from Team. It's 2 sticks of 16, and he'll have 2 available slots left over. So if he wants to buy another kit of 32, just plug it in, and now you've got 64. Very easy upgrade. He also wanted a DVD drive. He had an external one. And I said, look, if you use a DVD drive at all, it's really nothing. They're very cheap. Let's just plug it in, because the external ones are very convenient in that, you know, if you've got 10 computers, you just buy that one external DVD drive and you move it around as you need it. But nothing beats the convenience of having it built right into the computer. You don't have to go and find it or plug it in. It's all ready to go. And I said, since we're doing all of this anyway, and you do use a DVD drive from time to time, let's put it in there, because as we move forward, Cases that have the ability to add DVD drives are already hard to come by, and it's eventually just going to get completely phased out. I would guess in the next 2 years. So if we don't do this now, he better start getting used to plugging in. And he was okay with plugging it in, but I said, you know, it's so much better. We got the Corsair 200R case. It's got room for it. Plug it in, and hopefully make the best computer you've ever owned. So hopefully Randy is in the chat room today watching. I haven't seen him in there yet, but let me just scroll through the chat. Hello to all my friends in blue. Dave Hall says it's looking great and sounding great in Wisconsin. Right on. Thank you for the feedback, Dave. Peter Laycock says it sounds great at my end. Again, thank you for the feedback. Tim Davern said the color is more vivid. Right on. We're also going to try the new close-up camera to see if it's better or worse when we start putting the parts on the board. It's 1/10 the weight of the other camera. However, we will be limited by its battery, so we'll just see how far it takes us. And when the battery dies, it won't affect the stream, except the picture will go black, my audio will still play, and I'll see that immediately and switch to a different camera. But I'm very curious what kind of picture quality it is, and if you guys think it's better or worse. And it's certainly going to be easier for the camera girl because it's so much lighter. So that's all theory that we're going to put to test today. So there's a few more of the changes that I'm introducing, a little bit at a time. I've also turned the participation in the chat room to members and moderators only. And the reason for that is anytime I have a live video, 95% of the people who participate in the chat are members or moderators. The other 5% are viewers perhaps who saw the video suggestion on YouTube and wanted to check it out. They have no idea what's going on. And sometimes, whether intentionally or unintentionally, they disrupt the broadcast. And it's really up to me to choose to ignore it or not. A lot of times I'll deal with it because I don't want anybody else doing that again in that broadcast. So my thought is, if there's anybody else that's new who's doing that, and also to let the person know, you know, maybe they didn't know. And it just disrupts the instruction. And I can't tell sometimes if somebody's doing something unintentionally or if somebody is just really bad at communicating via messaging. And universally, when I have these problems, they're happening from people that are not members or moderators. So, well, I love to be able to open the chat room up to everybody, because even the people who aren't members and moderators, even that 5%, 4% of that 5% are just fine. It's that 1% and how disruptive they are and how loud that they sort of drown everybody else out, that the collateral damage of saying you've got to be a moderator or a member to participate in the live chat is that people who've never done anything wrong no longer can participate in the live chat. They can still watch the video. They can still leave comments on the video. However, they can also sign up to become a member for $9.99 a month, and they can then participate in the chat and interact with me if it's that important that they really want to do that. I didn't want to have to do that, but after the stream the other day, it became very obvious to me that I've given this several different chances, and now the data is very, very clear to me that it's not a problem I can solve any other way at this time. So I hope that if you're affected by it, and it's unjust for you, you didn't do anything wrong. Unfortunately, it's just what I have to do to make sure that the quality of my videos is not diluted by people who, you know, want attention, or they don't understand, or they're messing with me. You know what I mean? So I think it affects the overall quality of the video. And I think I'm going to start keeping it this way for a while. On occasion, depending on my mood, if I feel like being harassed, I might allow other people in the chat during live, but I do feel like I really want my friends to interact with me. And if you're a moderator or a member, you're a friend. If you're not a moderator or a member, you might be a friend, but I don't know yet. So perhaps the best time to determine that is not during a live video. All right, and if anybody has any other potential solutions that you think would be able to still allow regular non-members, non-supporters in to interact, but at the same time prevent the bots and the spammers and the troublemakers. I mean, I can't think of anything, but if you've got something, let me know. And yeah, that's where we're at. So we're making some progress, fine-tuning audio, fine-tuning video, fine-tuning the YouTube settings, DVR mode or not. Also, we tried 4K for a little while. Started out pretty good, and then it became unreliable. And while I'm also trying to fix the audio and video, I wasn't sure how much of the audio and video was being affected by the 4K settings that I had to make changes to my regular settings in OBS. And it started getting really confusing for me knowing where to go to solve particular video issues. Was it the bit rate? Was it an OBS setting? Was it a camera setting? So anyway, we're back to 1080, which consumes far less bandwidth. And when we get everything dialed in and looking exactly the way we want it, then I might revisit 4K and just make that one change. And if there's an issue with the video, I know it's somewhere in the OBS settings. You know, typically it's a bit rate issue. So that's how we're doing it. It's just very slow, but we just progress and get feedback and make change, do it again, get feedback, make a change. Previously to the new camera, the old cameras I was using, those took me about a year to get them dialed in as good as they were. And then once they were dialed in, I didn't touch them. And because I didn't touch them, I have forgotten what settings were the ones I had to change. So I'm kind of, it's not that I'm starting over again, but as I'm trying to resolve problems and starting to play with the menus on the cameras, I'm like, oh, now I remember. Once we get everything dialed in, I won't touch it. And then another year will go by and I'll be right back to not remembering again. XRod666 contributes $10. He says, hey, Kerry, long time no see. I haven't been able to watch a live stream in a while. Life has been busy lately. Well, XRod, thank you for the contribution. I'm glad to see you again. Life being busy is good. That's good. It's better than being bored. Catherine Anna Hauserman says, happy belated birthday to Patrick Rusaw. There's our friend Rick Lakes contributing $10. Thank you, Rick. David Moore says, sound is okay, video's okay. That's a good sign, because what I want to do is make it so the sound is great and the video is great. And I know it's not there yet, but hopefully with little improvements along the way, by making the changes small and doing it slowly, if I'm making anything worse, I know exactly how to undo it and then make what I think is the change I was intending to make, try it again. And then that's how I refine it. Like I said, it's a very slow process. So your feedback is really important to me. Oh, let's see. Pete Unwin says hello. Alhaj Tepej says hello. Planet Cryos says hello. There's Madi Yoel. He contributes $20. He says hello, Carrie and chat. And Madi became a member of the channel for 2 months. Thank you, Madi. Good to see you, my friend. Ryan in Canada contributes $2 Canadian. He says, I'm eating panzo with hot pepper and hot sausage today. I don't know what Panzo is. I have to Google it. Planet Cryos contributes $2 and $2 again. Patrick Rusaw contributed $5. He says, it's official. I'm a deck of cards. I turned 52 yesterday for my birthday. Well, unless you're a joker, there's two more cards. Isn't that right? Is it one joker? It's two jokers, isn't it? All right, and another $2 contributed by Planet Cryos. And another $2 from Planet Cryos. And another $2 Canadian. From Ryan in Canada, he said, yesterday it was my 41st birthday. Happy birthday to Ryan in Canada. Right on. A lot of birthdays in August, huh? My brother's birthday is in August. Don't let me forget.
What day?
Towards the end of the month. I know you turned DVR mode off for a reason, but I do miss it. I wonder if I'm the only one. That's okay. Do let me know your feedback on these changes, if you're on board for it and you understand, and if you don't care one way or the other, or if you have a preference. What I'm kind of doing is taking a consensus. So if a lot of people prefer it a different way, then I want to give people what they want and just find another solution. So everything I'm doing is just experimenting, trying to solve some of the frustrations I have on this side of the camera. The whole reason DVR mode was turned on was to solve frustrations I had. And then when I turned it on, it created new frustrations I didn't have. So one way or the other, neither solution is perfect. However, the good news is, once the video is done and YouTube processes it, it's just like any other video, and you can, watch it from the beginning at any point, at any time. But at least with the live stuff, it's good to know that everybody watching you're all watching the same thing. I don't have some of you watching from 10 minutes ago or an hour ago if I've been going that long, and then making comments in the chat room regarding what you saw, and I have no idea what you're talking about. So because I want to reach out and interact with all of you, you can imagine what's going through my mind is confusion. The other option is I stop interacting. But if I stop interacting, what's the point of being live? I might as well just go ahead and do what most others do and record, edit, and post. However, that's a lot more work for me. But I also really enjoy interacting with you. Find Me in Hawaii contributes $10. He says, you look fantastic and you sound great. Happy Aloha Friday, everyone. And that's from Ken Chong there in Hawaii. Colin Logstaff with a 20-pound contribution joining us from the UK. Thank you, Colin. And of course, thank you, Find Me in Hawaii. Where One says, I use DVR mode sometimes, but I understand turning it off and I don't mind. Tim Teal says, Carrie, thank you for the help with the new Mugen 5. It was nice to be able to know exactly what to do for the 1200 socket. Sounds great also. Right on, Tim. Glad that my videos were helpful to you and clarified any sort of confusion about the installation of the cooler. And hopefully you're real happy with that cooler. I think it's a steal. It's a manufacturer not many people here in the US talk about, especially not the big channels, because as far as I know, Scythe doesn't sponsor anybody. So one of the reasons you're going to see those big YouTube tech channels going with certain name brands is, and more likely than not, those big brands are paying them to do that. So it's kind of unfair when you have a little guy who actually performs as good as or better than those big name brands that those big creators are, talking about, just praising it, less expensive and easier to install But because they're not paying anybody to talk about it, or they're not paying those big YouTube content creators, so the Mugen 5, like if you do a search for it on YouTube for a review, you'll see a lot of reviews on this cooler, but very few of those people doing the reviews would be considered large YouTube tech channels. And that means if a large YouTube tech channel did a review on it, they probably got paid or were sent a review unit. It's possible they bought it, but it's not likely. What I like to do as much as possible is buy the parts I genuinely am interested in, rather than showing you parts the manufacturers want to push at that time of year or whatever. I do accept parts from time to time from manufacturers. Typically, a lot of the Silverstone and Be Quiet product you see here is provided by the manufacturer, but I'm not paid. They just go, hey, if you want to review the power supply or the case, we'll send it to you and you keep it. And then I'll use that in a build, and then I'll sell that to hopefully one of my viewers, and the money saved on the case or any of the parts that were provided, I don't charge for those. But I will include it to the value. I will say, you know, the computer, if you add up the cost of parts, this is how much it's worth. But I'm not profiting from those free parts. I'm able to then discount that computer that's brand new and hopefully break even, or if I am going to take a loss, it'll be an easier pill for me to swallow, and everybody's happy. Manufacturer got their product reviewed. I was able to make content out of it that I hope was interesting to some of my audience. And when it's all said and done, with the computer that's built, I have no use for it. So now what do? I don't necessarily want to sell it to a stranger at a discount. I want to sell it to somebody I know at a discount. I'll give my friends the deal. And since all of you are my friends, I'm super happy when the opportunity comes along to build a computer for my viewers and to sell it to them at a deal where if they were going to put the parts together themselves, they couldn't do it cheaper, let alone do all the work. So here we go. This one is for Randy in Missouri. Bob R. just contributed $10. Les Stevenson says, Carrie, I just noticed the further away I am from my laptop, the clearer it gets. You might need some glasses, I think, there, Les. Thank you to Bob R. for the $10 super chat. He says, TGIF, Carrie, thanks as always for what you do. Right on, Bob. Well, thank you. Colin Hunt with a 10-pound contribution says, good evening, Carrie and the community. I hope everybody is well. Right on, Colin. Where are you watching from? Are you in London? Wilhelm Gordon says hello. There's Randy Phillips. That's who we're building this for. Randy's in the chat. He says, I am sending you my laptop to fix and move the data over. Sounds good to me, and we'll make a video with it. Russell Stewart says hello. Russell says, I have an Intel 660p 1 terabyte M.2 NVMe drive, and I still use the Intel Mass Storage program. You should be getting a notification on the Intel Mass Storage program telling you it is no longer supporting that drive. The drive technology that Intel, the whole SSD storage that Intel was developing, sold that to SK Hynix. So if you use the Intel Driver Update Assistant, which is a free download, just go to Google, type in Intel Driver Assistant. It's a little application you download, and it will look for new drivers or software for anything Intel related on your motherboard. So if you have an Intel CPU with integrated graphics, that's an Intel video driver. If you have an Intel Ethernet adapter built into your motherboard, that's an Intel driver. If you have Intel Wi-Fi adapter, Bluetooth, this will detect anything that Intel makes on your system. And when it detects that solid state drive, it's going to offer you SK Hynix replacement software. So obviously Intel isn't going to keep offering SK Hynix software for a drive Intel no longer makes. So they must be doing this for a short period of time. And then SK Hynix released a firmware update for the Intel drives. And I think, I'm not sure, but I think all the firmware update does is it changes the encoding on the drive from saying, you know, having Intel in the embedded in the firmware as the manufacturer. It changes it to Solidign. It's the word solid, S-O-L-I-D, and then I-G-N. That's the name brand of solid state drives SK Hynix is introducing, and over the next year they're going to be putting a lot of marketing into it. So be aware, if you are using an Intel NVMe drive, the Intel software you were using before, if it hasn't yet, it will soon tell you that your Intel drive is no longer supported. That's why. And you would then remove the Intel mass storage driver. Just go to your control panel to see your installed apps. Just uninstall it. Using the free Intel driver assistant, it should then, well, you don't have to do it in this order. You can have them both installed, but you'll never use that Intel one ever again unless you have some other purpose for it. So anyway, it's going to offer you the new one. And then from that point forward, I guess any updates you're going to get from SK Hynix. And we'll see how that plays out in the future. Niall said, is the DVR not turned on? No, the DVR mode is off because a lot of people are going back and responding to things they were watching that they think is live, or they forget, or they're not aware that what they're talking about in the chat room is in response to something I did 20 or 30 minutes ago, and it was getting really, really bad for me to be able to address the questions that are being asked, because I'm like, what are they talking about? You know, what's happening right now? And it's not till later and I think about it and I go, oh, they were probably, you know. So DVR mode is off to ensure that all viewers are all watching the exact same content, so that the comments in the chat room will all be on point with what I'm doing in the video, so it won't throw me so much. This is just an experiment. I want to see how this goes. With the DVR mode on, it solves the problem of what people missed, and they have questions like me talking about this earlier, and you now cannot go back and see that until after the video is done. To the other problem where when we turn it on, there are people who are asking questions or responding to what they just saw, but what they just saw was something the rest of you saw, you know, upwards of an hour earlier. So because of that, I'm going to go back to putting DVR mode off, and we'll see how it goes. I just know that the chat room should be much less frustrating for me by getting rid of troublemakers and removing the confusion that occurs over and over and over again, where I don't understand why somebody is asking something I have already answered, and it's not until later that I realize they must have been watching earlier on, you know, and I'm getting kind of upset. I'm like, why did you just ask what I just literally told you the answer to? You know, it's frustrating. And then later on, it occurs to me, oh, you know, that's not my first thought, that they're watching far behind. Especially when I literally just answered the question, and it's just coincidence that they asked it after I answered it, and they're 20 minutes behind. It is so frustrating. And there's pros and cons. You know, like I said, DVR on has problems as a consequence. DVR off has problems with a consequence. So for my own sort of reducing the amount of confusion and frustration And I'm just baffled, like, why would that person ask that right after I gave the answer? Yeah, it was happening a lot. So we'll try this and we'll see what happens. We will stick with whatever works, and just keep making little minor changes to both audio quality, video quality, the camera close-ups. We're making another change to that today. Some of these changes, they just don't work out very well. Other times they work amazingly well. And this is how I do it. I can theorize in my head how it should work or how it should look or how it should sound. And then when we actually do it, things can happen I never considered. And, or things end up way better and I'm like, I should have did this a long time ago. So we just make little changes as we try to just find the right mixture, just the right recipe to get everything dialed in, to ensure that I'm getting you content that isn't being disrupted, that isn't turning me negative and then just kind of ruining the flow of the video. So 99.9% of the people watching it, they're just like, ugh, I don't like to watch it when he's upset. All because of just some 0.01% that caused it. It's not fair to everybody else, and it's not fair to me. I enjoy doing these videos, and I enjoy having you guys interacting with me. There's a sincerity there. I know if you're a moderator or a member, I know your comments are all sincere. James Grant just became a supporter. Thanks, James. And $10 comes in from Planet Cryos. He said, I enjoy the DVR mode, but I'm not going to complain either way. I like to catch up sometimes while you are talking. Happy Friday, Carrie. Yeah, well, again, thank you, Planet Cryos, for the contribution. Unfortunately, there are people who are in DVR mode and they don't realize it. A lot of people have no idea that they're not watching the content that as it's being broadcast. They're just completely unaware, and it's so common that I've been struggling with this for about 6 months, and it's not going away. So, those of you familiar with how YouTube works and how DVR mode works, you know exactly where you are, and you're not the ones causing this confusion from me. So you've got to remember, the channel isn't really for people that are already technical. This is to encourage people that if they're interested and they wonder what it would be like to build their own computer, or if they could do it, or how hard it is. My only goal here is to show them how easy it is, to explain some of the basics and encourage them and say, yeah, if you want to do this, you absolutely can do this. And I'll show you all the detail and I'll explain why. As a result, there are some advanced users who enjoy watching the content, even though they already know how to build a computer. So again, at least for today, we'll see how it goes with DVR mode off. After YouTube processes the video, after we're done today, you'll be able to jump forward and backward. It's just not right now. But again, you please let me know if you have feelings one way or the other, so I can kind of get a measure from the viewers about any of the changes I'm making. Are they better? Are they worse? And further, what would be even more helpful for me is if it's something that you don't like the way it is, instead of just telling me that you prefer the way it was, please tell me why. Or if there's something you think could be improved, it's not enough to tell me vaguely. You could really help me out by being more specific about what it is you think needs to be improved. And then I can go back and look at it and see if I'm seeing or hearing what you're seeing or hearing. And that could bring it to my attention, that I can validate, oh yeah, I didn't realize that, and then I can adjust for it. So by just saying I liked it the other way better, it's not helpful for me because you're not telling me why. So if you do tell me why, you don't have to, but it's much more useful information for me, and I want you to know that I appreciate those of you who do that extra step and don't just sort of complain about something, if you will, but rather suggest how to make it better, or why. Why is it you don't like it that way? Or why is it you do like it that way? That will really help me understand sort of the overall consensus of the viewer. You know, we have viewers from all over the world watching this live stream, and everybody's got different priorities and different perspectives. So what I'm aiming at is the consensus. Let's see, Glenn's Music said the audio level could come up a bit. Okay. Al Haj says, do you think Wi-Fi 7 will go up to 42 gigabits per second as TP-Link says? I haven't really, so I've read a little bit about Wi-Fi 7, but I have forgotten everything I read. It was a couple months ago. I think Maximum PC Magazine did a piece on it. I haven't read the article from TP-Link. If you want to post a link to it in the chat, I'll check it out later. Andy Kane said, if I was to do my first build because of you, I would make a video of me doing it. Hey, and if you do that, send me the video, or send me the link rather, so I can see it. The videos I enjoy the most are when people talk to the camera and show their face. I've had some people, they're only showing the product in their hands. And I've had other people put music in their video, and it just kind of ruins it for me. Make whatever video you want, however you want to make it. But if you show your face and you don't put any music in it, with your permission, I would share that with the audience so that you could have thousands of people watch it. And then say if you know, they can subscribe to you, for example. So no, that's a possibility. And there's the link to the Wi-Fi 7 article from TP-Link. All right, I'll check that out a little bit later. Thank you for providing it. Jeff Ryman says, good afternoon from Las Vegas. Niles Van de Sand said, the audio volume here is spot on. Hillard Bishop said, I have seen Optane in consumer-grade HP laptop. HP installed an Optane drive to cache a slow mechanical laptop drive. Yep, that's right. Better option would be an NVMe drive and add a stick of RAM in an empty slot. Absolutely agreed. I encountered that with a lot of the all-in-one HP computers. And then when you pulled the Optane drive, the system wouldn't boot anymore. It was a mess. You have to understand that when HP or Dell are including that, they're not including it because they think it's good for you. They have a contract and an arrangement with Intel where they're agreeing to do this, and Intel is basically paying them to do it. So obviously, if you could get rid of the mechanical drive, get rid of the Optane drive, and simply put in even a SATA M.2, it would be far better. And NVMe M.2 would be better. And ironically, it would be cheaper. So the manufacturers sometimes make deals with other manufacturers that aren't really in the best interest of the customer, but they will say it is. They will promote and market it that way. James B. Grant with a 50-pound contribution. Very generous, James. Thank you so much. Shamim says, hello, Carrie and community. Enjoying another great build, and greetings from Sweden. Right on. Ben Laird says hello from Scotland. Of course, Peter Laycock is also in Scotland. We have a couple of viewers here in what appears to be England. Arnold said the audio is lower than usual. I'll tell you what. There was a setting change I made to the audio, and I was very curious how that was going to play out. It's very, very easy for me to flip it the other way. I'm looking at my OBS audio levels, and they do appear just a little bit lower. So there's a couple ways I can address this. I think what I'm going to do is that whenever you have anything on automatic settings, it means that the settings adjust. If I put it on manual, I lock the settings down. And it may be more appropriate for me to go ahead and put it back on manual. I wanted to try. So I know the audio sounds good, but it does appear that the volume's a little lower than it normally is. Jim says, don't mess with it, it's fine. And I do realize it's not super quiet like it was the other day. You just have to turn your volume up a little bit. But now that I'm looking at it, it is bothering me a little bit that when my voice gets a bit louder and peaking, it's going where it should be. So I'm sure that's probably why it happened. There's one little minor thing I can do that isn't really going to change it that much. Let me go ahead and do that. And if I screw it up, I can put it right back because I really want to dial it in. And I, can very quickly verify, in fact, what they're saying is correct. So let's try that. That should be a little bit better. It's still not quite where I want it. I want to bump that up just a little tiny bit more. We're going to put that setting here. Okay, so I just bumped it up about 3 decibels. No, I bumped it 5 decibels. It was at 10, now I bumped it to 15. So it should be, I'm looking at it and it's, I am peaking a little bit in the red when I get loud, but under my normal speaking voice, it seems to be pretty well where I want it. So if the camera starts automatically adjusting it back, then I'm just going to be spinning around in circles. So we'll try this. Please let me know as the stream goes on if the audio level changes, because that means I need to put the camera audio settings back into manual mode so they lock in. And thank you for the feedback. Russell says it's much better. Right on. John Gardner says it's great audio and video today. I can't do videos as my ugly mug would scare off the chat. Listen, I've been told I have a face for radio. If I can do it, you can do it. This ain't a beauty show. That should be obvious. It's not a fashion show either. We're here to learn. We're not here to, it's just a really bad reason to not do it, to be so self-conscious that, that and you're probably joking, but some people sincerely, they're very, very concerned about the negativity they might get. But I wish there was a way that the people who say things like that we could look at them. Because I can almost guarantee the people who say you're fat are fatter than me. The people who say just really negative and rude things, if we could see them and judge them the same way, it'd be no contest. You'd be like, really? That's coming from you? So just keep that in mind if it happens. Ray thinks the audio was better earlier. Okay, anybody else agree that the audio was better earlier? What was better about it, Ray? Is there more noise in it, or is it oversaturating? Arnold says it's much better. If there's any issue on your end, take it to 13. Hale says the peaks should go red, but only the peak. Well, that's what it's doing, but it shouldn't be, in my opinion, it's doing it more. I only like it to happen once in a while, not every other word. So let me dial it back. We'll put it to 14. Try and find the middle here. And it's entirely possible because the camera audio gain is set on automatic. It could be adjusting the gain based on the volume of my voice. Certain words are louder or certain excitement that I talk with, the camera could be reacting to that, and then it defeats the setting that I just changed. So one more time, I'm gonna bring that the gain down from 15. We'll bring it down to, let's say 13.2. So we're at 13.2, kind of in the middle. Ray said it's painful on the ears. So sometimes somebody will take a car to a mechanic and they go, I need to fix my car. The mechanic says, what's wrong with it? The customer says, doesn't work. Mechanic's like, well, what doesn't work? And then sometimes the customer is at that point frustrated. I get in the car, I put my key in, and I turn the key, and it's exactly the same as before when I didn't turn the key. So it's not starting. That helps. So if you're saying it's hurting your ears, what's hurting your ears? The volume? Is there a saturation? Is there a hum or a sound of interference? What is it that's unpleasant to the ear? And if you provide that to me, I can look into it. Captain Blinsky says he liked the 14 to 15 volume levels. Lawn Dog says, wow, you have that much granular adjustment where it breaks into tenths for the volume level. That's fantastic. That's OBS, yeah. Les says the 13.2 is fine. William Lynn said the volume when you talk loud hurts my ear. So is that because you've got your volume too high? Niles Vandesand says you can't please everyone. Oh, I know that, but if there's an improvement I can make, I absolutely want to understand what it is that needs to be improved and make an attempt. Peter Laycock says it sounds great to me, and 1K Viper says it sounds good on his end. Thomas Backenstow said he had to back off his volume. Yeah, because I did raise the volume up a little bit. "13.2 is fine for me," says Ronald Hambrick. Peter Brooks says audio is perfectly good. Carlos Hernandez says headset sounds great. Peter Van Zolen says the sound is pretty sharp in my ears. Sharp good? William 99 says it sounds good. And Lawn Dog says 13.2 is working for him. Okay, so as I mentioned, when I set it in OBS, as long as I leave the camera on automatic, it may be raising or lowering the source that's being fed into OBS. I just wanted to see what would happen. And if it turns out that the volume gets too loud sometimes or too quiet sometimes, that's because the camera is adjusting the master source that's being fed from the camera into the capture card. And I'll just put it back into manual mode. And once I put it in manual mode, it locks in and doesn't change. So again, thank you guys for the feedback. Now, what I want to do is start the build. We're about an hour in. I like to do a little monologue, get some business out of the way, have a minute to say hello to everybody. Mark Gaines says, check the super chat. Okay. Oh, I can see why. Mark Gaines contributes 50 pounds. Thank you, Mark. Also joining us from England. Prasoon Suresh with an £8.99 contribution says, hey, Kerry, I'm joining after a long time. I got busy with work. I hope you're doing great. Absolutely, I hope you're doing well. And thank you so much for supporting the channel. So as we continue with these little attempts at improvement, one of the new items is using a different close-up camera. So we're going to try the new close-up camera, and I'd be very interested in hearing your feedback. I'm just getting it ready. And we're not going to use wireless on this camera because if the wireless transmission is having any impact on the video quality, then I'm not evaluating the camera fairly. So if the camera isn't producing a good enough picture, putting it on wireless isn't going to make it any better. So it's wired right now. So the camera girl's got to be careful so she doesn't trip over her own cord. But ideally, if you guys like this picture quality that's coming out of this camera, then I'm going to get a different kind of I'll probably get a gimbal that'll keep the camera level, and will also power the camera. We're running off the batteries inside the camera right now, and they're only probably 20 or 30 minutes worth of battery life in it. And when the batteries die on this, we'll switch to a different close-up camera if we still need one. So here we go. Let's switch over to the close-up camera right there. Okay, so bring it in, and you can see the color temperature is a little bit different. But that's okay, because this camera really isn't designed for me. It's designed to be looking down at the parts. So let's take a look now at what we've got. I'm going to start setting some of these items off to the side so we have some room to work. Patrick Russo said the picture is a little darker, but it's okay. And that's an adjustment I can make. That's not a problem with the camera. Just a little adjustment. Luke Greenia says, wow, that looks great. Bob R says, good color, wow. Oh, I'm getting a better reaction than I thought I was going to get. Okay, here we go. You've seen this a million times before, but now we're going to get it from a different camera. Glenn's Music says, this is where I start to get dizzy. Well, we'll remind camera girl to try to have a steady hand and don't move that camera around too much. It's something you just have to practice and you'll get better at it. Some people are more sensitive to that. David McGurran says the picture is sharper with this camera. John Gardner said the picture has a slight blue tint, but looks far better for close-ups. Kerry looks like he has a nice tan on this camera. Well, it's only a bare, raw sun coming down on me every single day. Dave Hall says there's excellent detail in color. Ronald Hambrick says it's impressive video. Russell Stewart says great picture. Peter Laycock said it's a really great picture. Okay, well, let's start seeing what kind of detail this camera is going to pick up with regards to connectors and writing on the board itself, because that's really where I need the improvement to be. Of course, we need the M.2 screws out of here. Bring this down like so. Set this down here. Yeah, the picture does look a little bit dark, I agree. And you know what? I kind of figured it would be, because when the camera's pointed at me, there's a reflection of light off the wall behind me that brightens the image. When we're pointing down, and especially at something dark, and the lighting is further away, it has a bigger impact on the brightness of the image. And so when I adjusted this camera, I didn't adjust it the way I should have. But we got to start somewhere, and if it's not terrible, we'll just keep it where it is. The Greek says the depth is there and it's very nice. Let's see what kind of, go ahead and get some close-ups of this board. Just kind of very slowly zoom in. Is that as far as it'll zoom? Let me turn it this way so the writing is there. And then just kind of move around the board very, very slowly. See what kind of detail we're picking up. And if the picture gets too dark when we zoom in. It looks pretty good to me. What do you guys think? Jim S. says that is far better than ever. Vern Mahoney says that's very good detail. Peter Brooks says I can read the text on the board, no problem. Glenn's Music says, hey, that almost looks like a motherboard. Carlos Hernando says it's working. Well, it seems like the consensus is everybody's liking it. They are saying it's an improvement. Stealth Mode says there's great detail. Tony Cheek says it's a Very nice picture. It looks awesome. Doing great close-up, says Bob R. Old Man 55 says, even reading the text, good and clear. The text in particular that's really hard to capture on camera is next to all of the connectors written on the board. And the reason why I don't often need to look at the directions is I look right on the board where it tells me what the connectors are etched on the board, like CPU optional, CPU fan, right? If you look at the memory sockets, and you look right here, written really, really small, it's telling us DDR4-A1, -A2, -B1, -B2, and then it's got a line connecting A2 and B2, and it says first. What first means is if you're only installing 2 modules, it wants you to use sockets A2 and B2. And they're numbered, they're listed in the order, in the same order that the sockets are. So A1, which is at the top, is this socket at the top. The next socket, or the next writing, the A2, that's this gray socket. And it's telling us to use those 2 gray sockets first if we're only going to use 2 sticks of RAM. Not that it won't work any other way, but this is the recommended way for the best performance. So you don't absolutely have to do it that way. You only have to do it that way if you want to do it the right way. Okay, so I got to move a little faster because I don't know how much time we're going to get on this battery. So here is our processor. Try to move that camera much, much slower when you're making your adjustments. And this is in the old fancy packaging. Any flagship Intel chip like the 12900K is in unique packaging. The 900K at the time was in unique packaging. When it's no longer the flagship, it goes back into a regular cardboard box, and then the new flagship gets a fancy box. And usually they change the box design with each flagship, and it's a waste of money. I wish they didn't do that, but if you order an 11900K today, you will not get this. And by no surprise, the 11900K is cheaper, and I suspect that one of the reasons why it's cheaper is putting it into the standard cardboard box costs far less money than this, and you're paying for this. And I don't want to pay for it. That's why I have a problem with it. This has no value to me for the way Intel wants to present their package. Okay, so really, if Intel just shipped it like that, that would be fine with me. And then whatever money was spent on this could be saved, making the chip less expensive. Also, when Intel is loading these on a truck and distributing them, you can only fit so many of these in a box. Imagine how many more of these you could fit in the same size box. So your cost of distribution is more expensive, the packaging's more expensive, and the packaging doesn't serve any purpose once you've removed the product from the package. Some people keep these. I have no idea why. So I find it completely unnecessary for those reasons. That's my opinion. Peter Lakecock says, it's brilliant and very clear and great camera work. Well done, camera lady.
Thank you.
Doman 2000 says, another piece for the environmental waste pile, right? How long is that going to take to biodegrade? Trevor says, keep the plastic boxes from the CPU. They will have value in years to come. Well, here's the thing. Yes, they will have value, but it's not going to be like I can buy a new car value. To put that away somewhere and then list it on eBay in 20 years, maybe I'll get 20 bucks for it. For 20 years of storage, that's not a good payoff. So yes, you're right, it does add more value, but the likelihood of this being something rare that it's going to be $1,000 or $2,000, unless it is worth $1,000 or $2,000, to actually have to store it for 20 years and wait, doesn't seem worth it to me. That's just the way I see things. Hey, Remus Computer Solutions joins us in the chat room. That's Anthony there in Las Vegas. Anthony is also a system builder, and he builds these really high-end overclocked machines that are, the amount of testing and detail Anthony puts in his systems is absolutely astonishing. But if you want a computer from Remus Computer Solutions, don't ask him to sell you a $600 computer, because I'm pretty sure he doesn't sell them that cheap. Here's what we have with the CPU. Remus Computer Solutions says, yeah, that 10900K packaging was a pain. Yeah, right? The blue orb, where it's like, where do you open this? Yeah, and again, they were so big, it was really costly for Intel to package and distribute those, because the size of the box that the chips are being sold in bulk, the retail stuff and the big packaging, not only was the CPU in that orb, but that orb was in like a cardboard box with packing around it. And then the individual CPU box was like this big from Intel. So you could only get, like, how many did they say they could get in a box? I think you could only get 12. And with the regular cardboard box that Intel uses, their normal way of shipping and packing, you could get like 10 times more. So obviously the cost of distribution was much, much cheaper. I've had a few people, you know, turn those little blue orbs into lights. I even sent a viewer they asked if they could have one, and I said, if you pay for the shipping, I'll send it to you. And I sent it to him, and then he sent me back a picture that he made a lamp out of it. I didn't want to throw it away, but I also didn't know what to do with it. So I think I still have some over at Studio A sitting in the garage collecting dust. Just feel bad about throwing that in the landfill. I kind of feel like it's environmental poison. Now, what I want to do first is I just want to put this M.2 screw, which I hope you'll be able to see. It's super, super tiny. I want to go ahead and add it to the motherboard right now, so the customer doesn't have to worry about finding it in the future, should they ever want to add another M.2. So I'm not going to tighten it too much, because I don't, I want the customer to be able to unscrew it, but I don't want it so loose that it could just vibrate out in shipping or whatever, and then good luck finding it, be gone forever. With regards to putting an M.2 here, let's go ahead and do that now. So I'll open this other bag to get our other M.2 screw out. Looks like my scissors have inadvertently become magnetized. That's hilarious. Let me get this stuff out of the way. And that Samsung 970 EVO Plus is 2 terabytes. Earlier this week, Amazon had these on sale for $163. And it was only for about 48 hours. You never quite know why the price is so cheap or how long it'll stay that cheap. So I was like, well, I want to buy 5 of these. And Amazon was like, you can just do 3. I said, okay, I'll take 3. And then 2 days later, price went to $174. The next day it went to $179. The next day it went to, I think, $189. And then I think yesterday it went back down to like $179 again. So I haven't checked it today, but it literally, the price has been changing on this at Amazon here in the US daily. So when I make a video and I tell you this is the cheapest I've ever seen it, you have to jump on it right away. Because if it's way too good of a deal, it'll sell out. And at the very best, that price is for a very limited time. And so the timing on it is critical. And if you miss it, they'll do it again at some point, you know. You can just check Amazon every day and you'll see that price will almost daily change by a few dollars one way or the other. But I've never seen it get that low before. I thought $179 was a good deal. We were paying $299 for these last year. Remus Computer Solutions says, Carrie, by the way, I think I have the same screwdrivers, purchased the GIS ones after hearing you talk about them over a year ago. Yeah, they're great, aren't they? Especially when using these M.2 screws. The Phillips #1, it can work, but it's a little bit loose. And so if you're not careful, you can strip the head of the screw out. The GIS driver, which was brought to my attention by a couple of my viewers, I didn't even know such a thing existed. And I thought, you know, for $12 or whatever on Amazon, I ordered it. I was like, oh, that's so much better. So if you're working on, say, a hard drive upgrade on a laptop, or even just taking the tiny screws to get a laptop apart, that GIS driver just makes it so much easier because it just fits right into the head of the screw perfectly. Doesn't slip at all. Glenn's Music here in the chat says, today, right now, it's at Amazon here in the US, the Samsung 970 EVO Plus is $189.99. And Patrick Rubensaw just confirmed that. And listen, at $189.99, that's still $10 off. I've been paying $199. If you can get a terabyte of NVMe storage at less than $100 per terabyte, that's a good deal. And I can easily do that with a budget drive like the Intel drive. But when you can get the budget drive price on a high performance NVMe, jump at the chance. So I realize this board will use and be compatible with Generation 4 for the newer drives, which are quite a bit faster. But in reality, for most users, the speed difference results in milliseconds of performance improvement for most users. The price difference to get the same drive in Gen 4 is about $40 to $50 more. So it just makes more sense. There's better value here, and more than likely, you wouldn't notice the difference outside of benchmarks unless you use your computer in a way that is very intense with the I/O all the time. And if so, absolutely, you want that Gen 4 for sure. It's worth the extra $50. But for the vast majority of us, you're barely going to notice any difference, if any at all, to be honest. Your boot up time's really not going to be any better. Programs loading aren't going to really load that much faster. Game load times might be slightly improved, but not night and day. Just might feel a little bit. So generally where people get excited is when they run the benchmarks. And they believe whatever the benchmark says. So if the benchmark's giving them some big number, they're super happy, which I just think is kind of humorous, because how do you know the benchmark's not lying or that the benchmark is accurate? But you're seeing what you want to see. I'm more like, when you're using the computer, does it feel faster? Does it feel like if it's $50 more for the same drive but Gen 4, are you getting $50 more worth of performance? And that's really something each of us has to evaluate for ourselves. But I can tell you, working with customers daily, I don't have a single customer, not one, who notices it. So if we can save some money for something the customer isn't going to notice anyway, and it's basically the price of a budget drive, but we're getting the high performance Gen 3 drive, I think it's a no-brainer. Let's get down close here on the board, and can we focus in right about here? This is where I'm going to put the M.2 drive. It's got a little notch cut out here. You're going to put this in on a bit of an angle. If I try to put it in upside down, the notch is on the other side and it won't go in. So really something you cannot screw up. So I'm going to line that up, and I can't see it. I'm doing this backwards so you guys can get a better picture. So I can't see where the socket is. Can you just raise the camera a little bit, right? No, you were right there. Perfect. I'll just look at the camera. Okay. I'm going to get my glasses. Now that I got my glasses on, there we go. And you see the little gold connector at the end? Right over here. Once I rest this in the socket, I'm going to push it forward, and that gold connector should disappear. That's how I know it's fully seated into the socket. And then the drive kind of springboards. That's what we want to see. Then we grab that JIS driver that Remus Computer Solutions was just talking about, along with that M.2 screw. And all the screw does is it just secures the drive so it doesn't fall out. So you don't need to make it super tight. We want to snug it up, maybe just a little tiny bit past snug, just so it won't be so loose that it, through vibration and such, it sort of rotates out. But you don't want it so tight. There's no benefit to doing that. It could make it difficult to get out. And if you strip the head on these little tiny screws, boy, you're in trouble. Don't make your life harder than it needs to be. Now back over at the Samsung packaging, just so you know, because I didn't think it was obvious, your documentation is inside of this. You see there's little dips in the plastic on each side here. So if you put your fingers in there and squeeze and pull, it comes apart, and there's your documentation. What does it say? I have no idea. I've never opened it. But just so you know. Captain Blinsky says, boy, that camera gets super close. Yeah, I think if I raise the brightness on it, the exposure on it a little bit, it'll even get better. But I don't want to do that today. Like I said, we're running on batteries on this thing, and I'm kind of curious what kind of battery life I can expect. And since it seems to be working out well, I'll be able to get a gimbal for it and then power the camera through the USB connector. And then I won't be on the battery, and that limitation will be gone. The next limitation I'll be dealing with will be the camera overheating. So we're checking those two things during today's broadcast. Picture quality, battery time, and if we have any heat-related problems and how long it takes for that to occur. The pins in the socket are extraordinarily delicate. That's why they're covered up. And when we put the CPU in, what I do is I align the writing of the CPU so that it's facing the same direction as the writing. If you pan the camera down just a little bit, the writing on the board where it says B560 HD3 is written in that direction. I'm going to put it in the same direction on most ATX and micro ATX boards for Intel chips. Also, if you look very closely at the chip, it's got a notch here, and it's got a notch here. And if you look super close into the socket, you'll see that little notch sticking out right there, and the other one right there. So this will not go in. It won't sit if we have it 90 or 180 degrees turned. There's also a little tiny triangle right there painted on the circuit board, and a super tiny little gold triangle. This is what everybody tells you to look for, but good luck finding it. That's why I usually don't talk about that, because everybody else does. And sometimes the boards don't have the little triangle. Sometimes it's just a little piece embedded in the plastic. You have to look really, really carefully for it. So my first rule is get the text moving in the same direction, look for that notch, and what I'm going to do is just gently set it on an angle into the corner. Then the other corner, and then I'm going to gently set it down. Now, if I have the CPU in incorrectly, it won't sit flush. It'll just it'll be uneven. So it'll be really obvious to you. And then if you're not sure if you're fully in the socket properly, you can just kind of grab the edge and just lightly see if you can twist or turn. Don't put any downward pressure. Right now that CPU is just above those pins, just. So by turning this without putting any downward pressure, we can ensure and verify that the little ridge under each corner is lock the CPU in place, that it is properly in the socket. But be very gentle with that. Also, it should be pretty obvious because once it sits in the socket correctly, you just kind of feel it. If it's not in the socket just right, it won't be level. One side will sit higher than the other. So you just want to make sure of that before you then lower the lid. And then when we close this lever, it's going to have a lot of pressure on it. So I'm going to put my hand here on the I/O shield. And you got to use a little bit of force. And that is going to push the CPU down onto the pins. And this little plastic protective cover is going to pop up. So even the little plastic protective cover has the little triangle embedded on it if you look really closely. See it? So if you ever have to put this back on, like if you were going to send the motherboard in for warranty, you'd have a hard time trying to put it on this way. It'll go on a lot easier this way. So hold on to this. Hopefully you'll never need it. But if you send your board with your parts installed on it to the manufacturer for warranty, you likely will not get those parts back. Universally, ASUS, MSI, ASRock, Gigabyte, they all have the same policy. If you are sending the board back for warranty, they want it back the way they sold it to you. You don't necessarily have to have the box and packing, but you absolutely have to have this. You absolutely have to remove your M.2 drives, your CPU, your RAM. You need to take all that out. And because those pins are so delicate, by shipping it without, by leaving those pins exposed, it opens up this opportunity for those pins to get damaged, and that ruins the board. And that's not a warranty issue. That's a user-created problem, and the manufacturer will not honor that warranty. So if you're going to ship it back, you need to cover those pins with this little plate. There's nothing else you can use to cover the pins. Not duct tape. You can't fudge it universally without exception. If you don't have this back on over that CPU socket, the manufacturer will deny your warranty. So put that away somewhere in case you need it. Now we can put the cooler on. Go ahead and just aim down here if you would. Charles Vandola says, I had to return a motherboard a couple of years ago and I couldn't get the CPU cover back on. Yeah, it can be a little tricky, but it definitely goes back on. Remus Computer Solutions said I'm on 144p because T-Mobile. Oh man, this video must look terrible in 144p. Remus Computer Solutions says, Kerry, I wanted to comment that I had a bad FSP power supply as well. Yeah, I've heard from a couple people about that. I meant to reply to you, Anthony. I've been so busy, and then when I have a minute, I forget. But I am gonna respond to you, I promise. All right, let's take a look at the way the Scythe Mugen 5 is packaged here, so you know what to expect if you order one. We have 3 boxes in here. One box here. See the little cutout in top? So you stick your finger in and lift it up. That's our fan. The other box over here contains all of our mounting hardware and even a magnetized screwdriver from Scythe. How cool is that? How did they get that in the box? Isn't that bigger than the box? It goes in kind of like that. Anyway, talk about things not going back in the box. And the rest of this box, see, that's got our documentation and our mounting hardware for about 6 to 8 different sockets from Intel and AMD. So one cooler to rule the most, almost rule them all. And then finally, the last box here in the middle, this is the heatsink, the cooler, and this box kind of opens uniquely. You pull the sides, it's got little tabs there, and then these fold back, and you can remove the cooler, and we'll set that down right over here. And just to keep my desk space clear, I just want to put this all back the way it was, so if I throw all the boxes on the floor, it creates a lot more mess than if I just throw one box on the floor. So I'm just going to close these back up and put them back in there and get it out of my way. At some point, maybe I'll upgrade to a bigger bench over here. But for now, just kidding. My eye! Okay. The first thing I want to do is install the back plate for the heatsink. So if we look at the bag of parts here, let's look over here. Dump it all out of here. Not only is this cooler nice looking and quiet and works well, it's really, really easy to install it. So if we look over here, they've made the revision C of this cooler by changing the sockets slightly, where before these were in a fixed position for Intel, but the new 12th gen is socket 1700, and it requires these screws to be spaced just a little further away. So to adjust it back to socket 1200 or socket 1156, 1155, 1151, 1150, those are all basically, well, not basically, they're the spacing on the socket for the heatsink is exactly the same, which is why the revision B of the Scythe, these were locked in place, they didn't move. And this was the only change they had to make to add socket 1700 compatibility. And I'm just pulling these little plastic caps off the corners. And these screws, they have 2 positions they can be in. One closest to the edge, which is where they are out of the box for socket 1700. Take the screw out. It's got a little shoulder on it and it seats right in. See how it's kind of funky? The carving is not just a perfect circle or a perfect square. And then the base of the screw has a little shoulder on it that locks in. So what we want to do is we want to bring that in closest to the center. And those are the only 2 positions. It's either the position closest to the center or the position closest to the edge. And then we slide that cap on and that locks it in place. And we just need to go around and do that to all 4. Already did that one. So this is one added step than what we used to do. And then again, that was required so that if you had a 12th gen CPU, you could still use the Scythe cooler because it was more than enough to keep the 12th gen CPUs nice and cool. In most cases, unless you're overclocking. So, you know, it mostly looks the same as it did before. The movement of the screws is fairly minor. And on the back of the board now, if I lift up the board, and you'll see I'm going to grab the board by the I/O ports. I don't touch any of the components on the board. So I don't have to worry about an electrostatic discharge or wearing an anti-static strap because I always handle every part by edges or by grounded areas like the heatsink or this I/O or even, you know, the plastic of the slot and then the edge of the board like that. So I'm not touching any of the metal down here and I'm not touching any of the componentry up here. Therefore, if I were to discharge static onto these parts, Doesn't hurt nothing, causes no problem. And then I don't have to tether myself. Now here on the back of the board, this is going to align like so. And you've got to put it in evenly. If you put one side in more than the other, then it sits crooked and you won't be able to move it. In that case, pull it back out, start again, and try to get it to go in evenly. And you'll see it's got these little cutouts where the screws that hold the socket down to the board, the two there and the one down there, so that this doesn't warp. If I turn this 180 degrees, you'll see it's got the two cutouts here and the same little notch here, so it will sit the same either way. It's really hard to screw this up. Now this is just going to fall out if we're not careful. Once again, if I touch this, if I give it an electrostatic discharge, it doesn't hurt nothing. So, but I need to hold it in, because if I don't, as soon as I lower the board, gravity takes it and it'll fall out. Set that back down. In this bag right here, this is the mounting hardware for both AMD and Intel. So we're not going to use all of this. If you're AMD, you won't use the Intel parts, and if you're Intel, you won't use the AMD parts or the other Intel parts. So for example, these little spacers here, these are required regardless. These long screws, these long skinny screws like that, oops, those are for AMD sockets. I can tell you right now, we aren't going to use those, so we'll get them out of the way. These standoffs, these are for the high-end X series chips that Intel sells. And these screw right down to the frame, in which case you would not use the spacers. You would not use anything else but these. That's the cool thing about the X299 boards and X99 boards, is the back plate. The socket is so big and strong that the socket is the back plate. So the installation's a bit easier on those. However, I don't build those very often, so I'm just accustomed when I see these. I immediately know exactly what to do with them, which is get them out of the way. Now on these spacers, there's like a rubber end on one side and it's hard plastic on the other. And if I put the hard plastic side down, that's wrong, and I'm going to show you why. So if I put this down, it just kind of, it's really like kind of loose until you push it down. The reason that's rubber is so that when it hits your motherboard, it doesn't scratch it up or score it. So with the rubber side down, it's going to be quite resistant. You're going to push that down, and what that's going to do is it's going to hold that back plate in for us, so that if I have to pick up the board, it won't just fall out. That is a really nice touch, because with other third-party coolers, sometimes you need 3 hands. Now, once you get the cooler installed, once you get it locked down, the back plate's never going to fall out regardless of the cooler. It's only during the installation that you're trying to get things seated, and then you have to pick the board up, and then the back plate falls out, and then your little spacers come off, and you're picking stuff up off the floor, and you're like, ah. So that is a super nice touch. See, look, when I pick up the board now, see how the back plate's, it's not going anywhere. That's super nice. So now I only need 2 hands instead of 3. In this bag here, we've got a couple of brackets. And I'm going to describe these brackets to you. It's really simple. Brackets are in pairs. You see these ones that look like a giant parentheses? These right here, these are for an AMD socket. I'll tell you right now, we don't need those. Now these look pretty similar, don't they? We've got a pair that looks like this, and we have a pair that looks like that. This one that just has 3 evenly spaced holes, that's for your 12th gen CPU. not using 12th gen. So for literally everything else, you've got this one, and you'll see the holes are elongated so that it can fit numerous socket sizes in the Intel family. So we're going to grab one of these, and we're going to bring it right over here, place it over the top. Make sure that when you put these in, you're going to cover the CPU lever. You'll notice how there's an indent. That indent, you see, it's going to sit over the capacitors, and we don't want to hit those capacitors and make contact with them. So for that reason, there's a dip. So you make sure the dip goes up. And put that right over the socket. And so they should be symmetrical, like a mirror image of each other. Then we're going to take these thumb screws and can simply just tighten these down. This is an incredibly easy cooler to install, whether it's an AMD socket or any of the numerous Intel sockets. Universally, it's easier, or it's easy rather than most. We can use our Scythe and screwdriver now and just tighten these thumb screws down. Now these I want to snug up pretty tight, but be careful, don't over tighten these. You can crush your motherboard. But we don't want them loose, okay? So get them where it's very clear they don't want to rotate anymore unless you put an exorbitant amount of force, and we don't want to put that much force on delicate electronic instruments. Now, when we put the heatsink on, we're going to apply thermal compound to the CPU itself. And then this screw here and this screw under here are going to line up with the hole in the middle of these brackets we just put in, and that's going to secure the heatsink to the top of the CPU. So that's the method. That's the reason why we're doing it the way we're doing it and why it's designed that way. So what I see a lot of that I don't like is when I'm looking at people saying, here's how you fix this or that on the internet, they follow a ritual. You click here, you click this, you do that, and as a result, you get the fix you wanted. And it's not that they're wrong, but sometimes they have added steps in the ritual that are completely unnecessary, and they don't know. And if you call them on it, like when I've said to people, you could skip that part of it, they go, I don't know what to tell you. Okay, all I can tell you is if you do the steps the way I tell you, it addresses the problem we're talking about. So that's what happens when people ritualize a repair and they don't understand why those steps matter, what each step is doing. Quite often, the frustration for me is that it's very common that someone will reach out to me and they'll want to know, how do I do something, right? Whatever it is they're trying to solve. And I start to explain to them how to do it, and they're like, well, that's not fixing it. And I said, well, I didn't know you were fixing anything. I thought, let's start again. What is the problem? Don't tell me what the solution is. That's what people do often, and it drives me crazy. How do I adjust my paging file? And you go, well, you click here, you click here, you click there, but that's not fixing my problem. Well, why did you want to adjust the paging file? Well, my mouse is slow to respond. What in the world would, I get really upset at myself because I should know better. Somebody asks me something like that, I need to just say, back up. What led you to wanting to adjust the swap file? What is the end result you're looking for? Oh, mouse is not responsive. Okay, well that's a completely different way to go about fixing that. And people will say, well, I don't want to learn all this stuff. Just tell me how to fix it so I can get on with life. And it's like, well, I can't tell you how to fix it if you don't understand why you're doing it. Well, I could. But when it happens again, and it happens for a different reason, you're right back to square one again, and you've learned nothing. So it's frustrating to me when people tell me what they need to learn. It's like, you don't know what you need to learn. If you were doing it yourself, you wouldn't be asking me for help. So it's got to be one or the other. So it's just a little maddening sometimes. Okay, what do we do next? Patrick says, oh boy, Carrie's getting long-winded again. Yeah, I got that battery. Got to worry about that. A couple of contributions that I missed here in the chat. Avery Ramsdorf with $2 and Charles Vandola with $2. Thanks, guys. Have I missed anybody else? I think I'm caught up. You're not getting any low battery warning or anything, are you?
No, it looks like at 85, 90%. Left.
Left?
Left.
Maybe I'll get long-winded some more. How are your hands holding up compared to the other camera?
It's much easier, much lighter, but the angle is where the shoulders are a little unhappy, but it's no big deal.
Well, that's with the handle we've got on it.
Mm-hmm.
We can put a longer handle on it.
Yeah, this is a little weird.
Yeah. Good to know. All right, so let me think. What do I want to do? Should I put the heatsink on it? Yeah, let's put the heatsink on it. We've got the thermal compound right there. These are the gloves I've been using to do this. I get them from Harbor Freight Tools. They're the 3 millionths of an inch thick. I say nitrile. Camera girl says it's nitrile. I think it's nitrile. Either way, they're non-sterile. There's no powder on them. It's not latex, it's not rubber. And the smaller this number is over here, the thinner the glove is. And then for me, I'm not a big person, so I just get the medium. They come in different sizes. So if you're shopping for these, there's a few things you want to look for. Primarily, the thickness of the glove. I prefer 3 for thermal compound application. But I can use something thicker, it's just not as comfortable. No rubber, no latex, nitrile only. They've got to be powderless. They're not intended for medical use. These are not sterile. And finally, if it doesn't have a size on the box, if it just says one size fits all, one size never fits all. So I won't buy it unless I'm absolutely desperate. I'll hold out until I can get the medium size in the 3 millionths of an inch thickness. And there were 100 gloves in here. That means I've applied thermal compound 100 times since I opened this box a few months ago. Now, you can use your right or left hand, that doesn't matter. You want to make sure the glove is clean. We don't want to add any contamination to the thermal material, or it'll reduce how effective the thermal material is. So let me check it, make sure it's clean. We're good to go. All right, let's focus down here. Kind of estimate what I need there. Better to guess low and add some. If you put too much on, which I think I put a little too much on, what I'll do is I'll use one of the other fingers, because as I touch it, it comes off on the glove. So if I put too much on, just keep switching fingers and it'll come off onto the glove. That way it's an easy way to reduce cleanly any over application. But we're just going to finger paint this on, and we want to cover the entire surface of the CPU. and I tap on it, it creates these little hills and valleys so that when we put the heatsink on top and tighten it down, it should spread without any air bubbles or anything like that. And if I get a little off of there, you know, it kind of bugs me. But you see how much came off onto the glove. And so I feel like that's actually a really good amount. Whatever extra I thought I put on there, I've already taken off simply by spreading it. But if I still felt I had too much on, I'll just keep tapping on it with a clean finger of the glove. If I still have too much, I'll do it again, and I'll do it again, and maybe even work my way further down the finger and just kind of very lightly take the extra or the excess off of there. So that looks pretty good. And then when we take the glove off, what we're going to do is just grab it and pull it inside out so that thermal material doesn't get all over everything. So let me just toss this away. Boeing 757 pilot contributes $10. He says, hey, Kerry, wow, you're truly an excellent teacher. You thoroughly explain, anticipate questions, and get into the nuance. Definitely a master teacher. Have a great weekend. Very kind of you, Boeing 757 pilot, and thank you for your contribution. Flattery will get you everywhere. When we go to put the heatsink on, sometimes when you buy a third-party cooler, it'll have thermal compound already applied. Like if you were using a stock cooler that came with your CPU, those always have thermal compound applied, whether it's AMD or Intel. In that case, everything's been done for you. You do not add any more. You do not add any to the CPU. All you have to do is tighten the heatsink down, and the proper amount of thermal compound is already there. And if it's like a round circle of thermal compound and you're worried that, you know, it's a square CPU, there's not enough. There is enough. It's just thick enough that when your CPU gets hot, it melts the thermal compound. It becomes kind of liquidy and it spreads out. So the manufacturers and the engineers of the heat sinks they include with their CPU coolers have the exact proper amount, not too little, not too much, and that's how it's designed to apply to the CPU. Now, also some third-party cooler manufacturers, whether it's an air cooler or a liquid cooler, may also do this. In this case, it is not applied. There was a little piece of plastic I just took off that, again, is keeping the area free from contamination. Contamination is fingerprints, it's oils from your skin, it's dust. So we leave that little piece of plastic on until we're ready to install. If you forget to take that little piece of plastic off, you'll probably find your cooling is not as good as you were expecting. At the bottom of the CPU, of the cooler, we've got these two screws, one here that's at the outer edge, and the other side that's actually underneath this big metal radiator. And the way we're going to be able to turn that screw is we're going to use one of these holes right up here, and that's why Scythe includes that screwdriver that's the right length and has the right size Phillips end on it to sit properly into the head of these screws. This one that sticks out right here, see where that screw is? That's the side that goes towards our RAM because that's where our fan's going to go. So when we're going to put this cooler on, it could go on this way. Point the camera down just a little for me. It could go on this way, and it could equally go on this way. However, we want it in this direction so that we can put the fan on this side, and it's going to push air through the radiator towards your I/O ports, towards the back of the case. So just sit gently, sort of eyeball that and set it down.
Temperature.
You're getting a temperature warning on the camera?
Not a warning, but I'm feeling it. I'm starting to feel it.
Oh, okay. Well, that may be perfectly normal, though. Jose Acosta with a $5 Super Chat contribution says, hey, Kerry and chat, excellent show as usual. Thanks for the content, good sir. Right on, Jose. Thanks for supporting the channel. James Rasso with a $50 Super Chat contribution. Right on, James. Thank you. He says, another great video. Oh, don't worry, James. There's time for me to screw it up. We still have a ways to go. So what I want to do is just get one of these screws started here. Don't turn it too much. Just find the thread and just kind of get it just a little bit started here. Not too much, because it's going to push down this side, lift up this side, making this screw then harder to get started. We're going to go in from the top. Can you raise the camera a little bit? We're going to go in from the top all the way through until, can you bring the camera way, way down now? Turn this around. I want the audience to be able to see right down there. And what I'm going to do is just feel for it, since I can't see it. Just pick up the driver. It has a little bit of movement until I feel it seat. There, I felt it. And then you're going to have to push down and give that a couple turns. Okay, so now we've got it started, and this is the easy part. All we want to do at this point is try to turn each screw a couple of times, go to the other side, turn it about the same number of times, and then a little bit extra, then come back to the other side, turn it about the same number of times, and then a couple times extra, and come back over to this side. And what we're doing is we're making sure that the heatsink isn't going to be seated crooked, because it's not something you can visually see, but it absolutely can sit crooked if you tighten down one side before the other. And then you're going to say, I don't know why Carrie likes this cooler so much. It doesn't seem to work very well. And it'll be simply because you installed it incorrectly. So that side has stopped turning. You will know because it comes to a dead stop. You cannot over tighten it. It just stops and you cannot take it further. And if you attempt with a brute force to make that screw turn, you will shear the head right off of the screw. And then you're screwed. 3D Everything contributes $20 in Super Chat. Thank you, 3D Everything. Kurt Schlegel with a $10 contribution as well. Thank you, Kurt. Thank you, 3D Everything. You guys rock. So there's our heatsink on and applied. Now we're going to put the fan on. I'm going to go ahead and cable manage this cable right now. You don't want any of these wire ties in your build when you're done. What happens over time is they get brittle and they break and they fall into your system. And then when you move your system, because there's metal in here, it can fall behind the motherboard and short circuit it and toast your whole machine. So if there's cables that have these, take these off. And if you want to replace them with a nylon cable tie to keep your cables looking nice and neat, or if you don't care if your cables are nice and neat, just take these off and throw them away. And then you won't ever have to worry about that potential of damage ever occurring. Mike Vision says, I've left a little donation through PayPal. Right on, I'll check my phone here in a minute. Thank you. So I'm just going to grab a couple of these. I use a 4-inch cable tie. This is a generic little tube of cable ties I picked up at like Walmart or Harbor Freight Tools that had a variety. But I only pretty much use two different cable ties. I use a 4-inch cable tie and I use an 8-inch cable tie. I've pretty much never found any reason to use anything any different universally. Either the 4-inch thin cable ties or the 8-inch thicker cable ties, usually for power cables, are pretty much all you're going to need on your build. And I will need about 50 to 70 of them in most builds. And if you're going to do RGB, even more. So what I want to do when I look at this fan is I know I'm going to put the fan in this orientation like this, and that cable is going to go onto the CPU fan power, this gray connector. So I'm going to have all this slack. So I just want to go ahead and clean that up right now, because once this board goes into the case, there'll be no way to do it without removing the fan later. So let's just do it now. And you should only need to do it once. Any questions, any comments? I'm kind of glancing over in the chat room while I'm doing this. Be happy to address them. I hope you will join me on Sunday. I'm going to have a live broadcast from Studio A Sunday afternoon with special guest Mitch Morrison. Yes, Carrie and Mitch back in the kitchen at Studio A just like the old days. I don't know exactly what time we'll start, but do be aware to look for it. Sunday. Should be fun. And Jimmy and Lyle, I'm sure we'll be making cameos. So if you've been a fan of the channel for a while and you miss old Studio A and you miss the old Carrie and Mitch in the kitchen and you miss the dogs, well, got something to look forward to that we can relive those days and do it again. In fact, it may be the last time we do it over there. We'll see. In this bag, we've got these metal clips. And what these are for, they're going to clip the fan onto the end of the cooler or the heatsink. And you get two extras because you can buy another fan and attach it to the other side and have, you know, one fan pushing air through and another fan on the opposite side pulling the air through. I think adding the second fan is a complete waste of money. It adds noise, it adds another point of failure. And besides, most cases have a fan basically located right here. So if we put another fan here, we have just a little narrow gap between the two fans. And it doesn't do much to improve your cooling, and it can make the system difficult to work on because anytime you need to get in this area, doing any maintenance on your computer, it's in the way. If adding it actually made a significant difference in cooling, I would totally do it. But this cooler runs so well that with the exception of the high-end Intel chips like this 11900K, if we push it hard with this cooler, it gets hotter than I like. But this customer and most customers don't push their computers that hard for that length of time. So for normal, ordinary computer use where, you know, sure, you push it from time to time, this cooler's more than enough. If you're somebody who's trying to overclock or you're somebody who's doing tasks that are consistently resource intensive, I would not recommend this cooler for you, even with two fans. You'd probably be better with a liquid cooler at that point. So all I've done is I've attached those wire hangers by just inserting them into the holes that you would use typically when you're screwing a fan into your case. They're using the same holes. They didn't redesign the fan or anything like that. And then what we do is if you look very closely at the top of this cooler, it's got these little notches in the corner. See that? Looks like a little staircase right there. We line the fan up so that the fan brackets here face the edge of the heatsink, and that where the fan is open without the support brackets, we want that side exposed to us. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to rest it against the edge, and if you look, watch how it fits right into that carve out. And then I push down on the fan until it hits the top of the mounting screw on the bracket below it. And I know that's the proper height for this fan. That's the optimal height right there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab these two brackets and pull them back. And as I do so, it's going to lock into the fins and the little groove on the heatsink. It's on. Then we take this power cable and we place it onto the gray connector. It's got little grooves so that it only goes on one way, and you're associating it with the right pins automatically. So I don't know how well you can see that. Just push that straight down. Shouldn't require any force at all. Finally, we can put the RAM in, and we can do our first test fire and give the camera girl a break.
Battery.
Battery's giving you a warning now?
It's looking like 25%.
I thought it was 85% just a minute ago. Did you misread it?
It got warm and then it started to kind of cool off, and then the battery started to make it.
Interesting. Well, you know what? It's lasting much longer than I expected, and it looks like the battery will be an issue long before the heat. But it did something, huh? So it was whatever it was doing created heat, and it like adjusted somehow internally to cool itself off, because it has no fan in it. Interesting. Good to know. All right. Okay, so for the RAM, we've got this Team TFORCE Vulcan. I think it's a really good value for what you get. This is 32 gigs. Each stick is 16, and I think this is 3200 megahertz speed. This RAM, I think, is $90. If you can get 16 gigs of DDR4 for under $50 for each 16, that's a pretty good price. And of course, if you can do better than that, then that's a great price. So 16 gigs should be around 50 bucks, 32 should be around 100, 64 should be around 200. If you're getting RGB RAM or super overclockable RAM, you can expect to pay much more. So how I'm defining a value is, if I'm looking for good RAM, not cheap RAM, but good inexpensive RAM, $50 or less for each 16 gigs. So at $89.99 for this kit, that's $10 better than that, right? So it's about, what, $45 for each 16 gigs. It's a really good deal, and it's really good RAM. It's got the heat sink on it. It's very reliable, and it's a great deal. It's made in Taiwan. Once again, reminding you, we go back to the gray sockets first. The RAM has it's keyed. It's got a notch. The notch kind of looks like it's in the middle, but it isn't. It's just offset a little, and that way you cannot install the RAM backwards. It will not sit into the socket. So when I install the RAM, I line up the edge of that circuit board of the RAM with the track. And it should be no force involved in this at all. It should be nice and easy. Once you verified it is properly in the track on both sides, use your thumbs, and you're going to exert some force here. Push down one side, then the other, and repeat it to the other gray socket. Same exact thing. Gentle into the track. Verify it is in the track on both sides before applying any force. Okay, we ready to power it on? Let me grab a power supply. Let me clear some of this also. It's my desk is getting messy over here. Guess I can put it there. Let's grab a power supply here. I like to use these EVGA 500 watt power supplies, typically at Amazon. Here in the US, you can pick them up for about $35. Anything under $40 on these is a good price. I've seen these go as cheap as 25 bucks on sale. I couldn't put this in a box and ship it to you for $25, so it's a really good deal. What I do is for testing, I kind of just use a wire tie on these cables to get them out of our way. So it's like it's just a temporary solution here. All the cables we need are just the large motherboard power connector. And I'm going to plug that in over here. Winston Liu with a $2 Canadian contribution. Paul1961 wants to know if I've checked my phone. I forgot, Paul. As soon as I hook up both power connectors, I'll stop for a minute and check the phone. Thank you for reminding me, though. Kind of anxious when I get this close to do the first power on self-test. It's like I can't wait to turn it on. Make sure everything works. There we go. Little clip, and there's a little ridge. Push that down, that locks into place. So that's all we need as far as power goes. Universally, for all motherboards, you have to hook those two up or your system isn't going to boot. You know, the fan might spin, and you'll think, oh no, it's broken. No, you forgot to put the connector on. Okay, and let me hook the power switch up real quick because, well, we've got the portable camera out. You can get a nice close-up right here. I bought this little power switch from Amazon, and it's for system builders or somebody that wants a remote power switch for whatever reason. It's like $12 on Amazon for this. And it's got this cable that all it has on it is the power switch connector and the power LED connector. You know, for me testing, I don't need to hook up the power LED, but it's no big deal to do it. If you look down here, this is the connector we're using. And if you look very, very closely, let's see how good this camera is. Right where my pinky is, it tells us what each connector is. The bottom row of pins does this, and the top row of pins does the other. Seems to be having a bit of a hard time focusing. Your owner's manual will also detail that out. But essentially, it's always the same on ATX and micro ATX motherboards, whether they're Intel or AMD. That is, this top row of pins is your power LED.
You saw the video? It says the battery's out.
It says the battery is out?
Yeah.
Well, we're still okay. We're almost done. Top row pins, power LED, positive cable closest to the edge, top row only. And then the power switch goes right beside it on the next two pins, top row only. Okay. Well, I'd say that was just about perfect. That's the best we could hope for, I think. Let me go back to the main camera. You're good. Thank you. Yay! First time with a brand new camera and a brand new setup. And the only adjustment I can think to make is adjust the white balance on it. Other than that, it's looking very promising from this point forward. I think that camera is going to work quite well for us. Let me know what you think. All right, checking the phone, they say. Let's see. Let me take a look here. $11.58 comes in from Michael Martin, who says, hey, Kerry, it's just a little contribution for you to do as you see fit. Keep up the great content, and I'm loving the channel. Well, thank you so much, Michael. Appreciate you. Russell Stewart contributes a $10 Amazon gift card. Says, thanks for all the help and everything you do. Thank you. $20 comes in from Luke Greenia. He says, thanks for all you do, my friend. Well, thank you, Luke, for continuing to support the channel. And Paul Shadell with $22.37. And I don't see a message from Paul, but it appears Paul is in Canada. Right on. Thanks to all of you for showing your support. It means a lot to me. It's not about the amount as it is that you gave something back, which is never expected but always appreciated. I'm going to step away just for a minute before we turn this on because this is warm and it's hot in here. If you have any questions for me, please ask it in the chat. And I just want to take a little break before I turn this on. Paul1961 says, great work as always. Paul Shadell is me. Oh, okay. Good to know. Well, thank you, Paul. Let me start hooking up cables. And once again, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask in the chat. I'll do my best to provide an answer or direction. And if you are in the chat and feel you know to answer or the answer to the question, please offer it. I'm not going to hook up Ethernet on a first boot. I do need a keyboard and a mouse. What Sony camera is that? The Sony camera we're using is an RV100 Mark 7.
The XR100?
Is it XR? Is it VR? I'll show it to you. Since we're not using it, I can put the camera on the camera so you can see the camera through the camera. So this is what we were trying to use for the close-ups before. It's heavy. So I got this $300 shoulder strap for it, and it's still heavy. So that's what we were using, and it just wasn't working out. I was trying a couple different things. And by the way, this is the old master camera that I used as my main camera, the XF400, with a wireless HDMI transmitter so that it can roam around the room without any cables, running off of the giant battery back here. It's a big old battery. And then a big battery on top of the wireless transmitter. And so holding that for 20 or 30 minutes is going to be a challenge to anybody. This camera was brought to my attention because of its specifications. This camera essentially has the exact same size image sensor as the one I just showed you. Furthermore, this camera's got more megapixels than the camera I just showed you. This is a still photo point and shoot camera that also does HD video in I think it does do 4K, I think up to 30 frames a second. The problem is it's really not designed to do video, not for a long time. It's meant to just do a few minutes here and there as like a travel camera. These big camcorders that are shooting 4K that I'm using have a fan built into them so they can run endlessly. You plug it into the wall, you don't have to worry about battery life, and they just run forever without a problem. These will overheat. But when I learned that the image sensor on this was a 1-inch image sensor, I never even knew they could do that. Doesn't seem possible. And if we look, the name of the camera should be right up on the top there. It's blurry. Turn it around the other way. RX100, and then the Roman numeral 7. It's got a little viewfinder. If we hit this button, little viewfinder pops up. The camera turns on. It's got a little flash if you need the flash. This is the HDMI output. It's a micro HDMI. You can see when talking about the battery saying it's yellow with a slash through it. Those are all the camera settings as I've got them currently. It's, you know, if you want to hold it up high, you can take the screen, you can pull it out, and you can adjust it this way. It's about a $1,200 camera, which is a fraction. It's less than half the price of what my XF400 cost me. And I never considered using one of these because I was concerned that the quality, that it would require more light because they would have an inferior image sensor. And I was also concerned that there was one other thing. Oh, that I wouldn't be able to broadcast very long with it. If I was just, you know, doing quick cutaways, something like this would be fine. But if I want to use, like the main camera, it wouldn't be replaced with this one, simply because this will overheat. However, never say never. When comparing the image quality from this camera, even to my brand new XF705, in many ways, out of the box with the defaults, this image is better. However, I have far more ability to control my image on this camera. I can dial in pretty much each individual color in multiple ways. So I can get, if I'm not getting a good image out of this camera, it's because I haven't adjusted it properly, and I'm still figuring that part out. It's kind of complex and it's new to me. This camera has some adjustment, but it's nowhere near as granular, but it's also less necessary, is what I'm figuring out. It's actually doing an incredible job. And this was a risk. Buying this for $1,200, if it didn't work, I was just basically going to have a new point and shoot camera to use, but I really don't need one because I use my phone for that. But I'd figure out something to do with it. So I could have wasted $1,200. Turns out I didn't. And so now I can move forward with, right now it's got a little handle. We could put a bigger handle on it. I've got the little shoe so that I can stick it up on the tripod and keep it out of the way. That was the other problem with the bigger camera, was where to store it when we're not using it. So this has been a very successful experience and experiment. I just want to move some of these cables out of the way. Bear with me for a second here. Let's get this out of the way. I don't want it to be confused with any of the other cables. So we might put the wireless transmitter on a gimbal, and then put that camera on a gimbal. And what the gimbal does is it's kind of like a gyroscope. And you can move the gimbal around, and the camera just kind of floats. You can move the gimbal forward and backward and side to side, and the camera just stays floating. And when it does move, it's smooth. It doesn't jerk around. So I didn't want to go through all that effort unless it was worth it. So we just do a little thing, try it, and then either back away from it because it's not good. Because anything I do going forward, we have to make sure we're starting with an acceptable image and that it's going to work. Looks like it's going to work fine. So now the next thing would be the gimbal, the wireless transmitter, see if that's working okay. And if that works okay, then it'll be providing power to it. So we're no longer using the battery, and we'll provide that through USB. So then that little camera will have two plugs, the micro HDMI out and then the little USB connector. And the USB connector will provide it the power, and the HDMI output will then feed to the wireless transmitter, or the gimbal will keep it all balanced. And that's the direction we're moving, and that's why. So that worked out really, really well. Unbelievable that they've got a 1-inch sensor in that Sony camera. I had no idea. I thought you needed the big DSLRs for that. So I really was skeptical that that was as good as it is. I'm very impressed with that. Winston Liu contributes $5 Canadian. He says, "You're the best teacher for computers." And then says something in French and maybe Vietnamese. Not exactly sure, but thank you, Winston. I appreciate your contribution and your kind words. Paul Kitching says, "Carrie, please take a look at a cage for that Sony from Small Rig. Reasons for a cage is it has more holes for mounting stuff like microphones, lights, but also some protect the HDMI port. Well, we don't want to add too much weight or make it too bulky. Otherwise, we're right back to having a heavy rig. But I'll look into it, and I appreciate you mentioning that. I have no idea what you're referring to, so I'll have to look it up and see what it is and whether or not that would be beneficial to the way we're using it here. Martin's agreeing with you, Paul. He says, absolutely, adding a cage that can be held with 2 hands makes it steadier and induces less fatigue. I have an RX 100 II and it's never overheated when used without recording to the SD card. Okay, we'll appreciate that information as well. Captain Blinsky said I missed his super chat. I missed a couple. Alan Lindos with a $7.77 contribution says it looks like you need another cold Gatorade. Help yourself and you're welcome. Thank you, Alan. Randy Shute has just become a supporter and joined the Tech Club. Welcome, Randy. Winston Liu with $2 Canadian. Dan contributes $5. Captain Blinsky contributes $10. He says, let's have a contribution avalanche. I'm okay with that. I think that catches me up. Doman says, all that equipment and it's beaten by the little one. But yes and no. For this specific use case, that little camera is more appropriate. However, if I were to put that little camera here on camera 1, well, it would work, and in some ways, just out of the box default color settings would be acceptable. I don't have all of the controls that I have with the camcorders. So if I was in a really confined space, it's nice to know that in a situation where I don't want to drag the big camcorder and the heavy, it's got a sturdy tripod. That little camera is so light, I can use a really cheap tripod. And if there's an area of confinement that would make using the larger camera less ideal, there are circumstances where one camera is better than another, depending on how you're using it. So in this case, and to my surprise, by the way, that little camera is very impressive and is far more appropriate to be using for these close-up shots than it's something that's as big and heavy and can cause so much fatigue for the poor camera operator. And I kept trying to think of ways to offload the camera weight to like a Steadicam. But I mean, putting a Steadicam on in all of the equipment and all of the expense, I kept thinking of all these different ways to offset the weight of the camera with something else. And it never occurred to me that a camera that small would be so darn good. And the way I found it, or found out about it, was completely by mistake. I wasn't looking for that. I was looking for information on the XF705 or 605. And there's a guy named, he's got a YouTube channel called Marcus Pix, all one word, P-I-X, Marcus Pix. And he's a camera and film enthusiast. And he's doesn't sell anything. He doesn't have any monetization turned on his channel. He doesn't want anything from anybody. He's just sharing his passion. And he has a bunch of cameras. He's probably got over 100 cameras. He's got over 100 microphones. He loves this stuff. And he'll sometimes just give some of the stuff away. And he shares a very similar life philosophy to mine. He's also into, eating healthier. So, we differ there. But he's a super cool dude. And he did this video comparing the XF605 to that Sony camera. And I'm like, yeah, this got to be a joke, right? It's a really good video. You should watch it. But it's still an expensive camera. I mean, $1,200 ain't cheap. But it's a lot cheaper than these camcorders. Did I miss some contributions, guys? Gary Tatum just contributed $10. He says, just a thought. Have you considered a lithium battery pack that camera girl could clip onto her belt? That way you wouldn't have to run a USB across the room. Oh, the USB won't be run across the room. As I mentioned, the gimbal should be able to, we just have a little, essentially like a USB patch cable that'll go from the gimbal to the camera. And so the gimbal's battery then takes over for the camera battery. And then the HDMI cable will go to the wireless transmitter that also attaches to the gimbal. So it's gonna add a little bit of weight to it, but at the same time offer the freedom of movement, not have to worry about tripping on a cable and not have to worry about the battery life. So, and there may be a couple other solutions to look into for that, but you know, I didn't even know if it was going to be usable. So I haven't really begun that thought process yet, but I appreciate the suggestion. Jay Powers with a $2 contribution said, this is for a can of Coca-Cola. Thanks, Jay. I think that catches me up on everything. I see the one from Captain Blinsky that I just talked about a few minutes ago. That was $10. He says, let's have a contribution avalanche. And then I don't see anything else. It doesn't go any further back than that. So I apologize if there was one before that, Captain Blinsky. Chrissy B says, you are looking pretty lean. Really? Oh, I love this camera. Mark Gaines wants to know, how do I enable TPM on an ASUS Prime A320M-K motherboard? Well, I don't think I've ever used one of those motherboards, but I'll show you the way I would find out. As I would open my browser and I would type in enable TPM ASUS Prime, what did you say it was? It was a A320M-K. So I guess the M is that it's micro ATX. A320M-K. A320M-K. And the first Google result provides you the answer right on the screen without a link to. Press delete when the ASUS or ROG logo appears when you first turn the computer on to enter the BIOS. Go to advanced and then under AMD ITPM configuration page and switch TPM device selection option to firmware TPM. Press F10 to save changes and reboot. It's that easy. All I did is I went to Google, I typed enable space TPM space ASUS space Prime space A320M-K and hit enter, and immediately the result appears on the screen and you don't have to click any links. Winston Liu with another $2 Canadian contributed in Super Chat, says you have some more money from Vancouver, Canada. Well, I don't mind if I do. Thanks again, Winston. What time will the Sunday broadcast be? I don't know yet. It'll be in the afternoon. Hopefully, I'll know earlier Sunday in the morning or possibly Saturday evening. There's a lot of work I have to do to get that studio caught up. Those computers haven't been updated. All the camera equipment needs to be cleaned off and adjusted. And I'm hoping to get it all done Saturday night. But it's a lot. If I don't get it done Saturday night, I'll have to finish where I left off Sunday. And until that's done, I can't go live. That all has to be done first and foremost. And I don't know how long it's going to take. As soon as that's done, at that point, I'll create the live stream that will kick out the notifications and say what time it's going to start. Sometime in the afternoon on the West Coast. Paul Kitching said, I used to shoot weddings on a Sony FX1 with a Steadicam Merlin, so I feel the pain. It's very heavy. Yeah, for sure. Edmar Gaines with a 10-pound contribution says, thank you for that, Kerry. And he did it twice. I don't know if that second one was a mistake, but thank you, Mark. I appreciate you. I'm glad to help. Just believe in teach a man to fish, right? Andy Kane says, that NVMe drive, how can you tell it is a Gen 3? It says so on the box. It said so on the product page when I ordered it. When you order an NVMe drive, you're gonna know what size it is. Is it 500 gigs or 1 terabyte or 2 terabytes or 4 terabytes? You're going to know what generation it is, Gen 3 or Gen 4. You're going to know who the manufacturer is. And you can also, while you're looking at the drives on Amazon or Newegg, look through the reviews. Usually someone will take a screenshot of the drive performance. So if you're running something like Crystal Diskmark and you're getting somewhere between 2,000 and 3,600 megabytes per second on your sequential read speeds, you're in Gen 3. If it's below 2,000 on an NVMe drive, it'd still be Gen 3, but only times 2 instead of times 4. But it is a major part of the information provided on the product page that you would be purchasing it from. So any NVMe drive sold online is going to tell you what generation drive it is, no differently than what its capacity is. I mean, can you imagine you buy an NVMe drive and go, how do you know what size it is? I would hope you knew what size it was when you were ordering it. Should be one of the major things in the product description is the size and the generation of the NVMe. And of course, you can always Google the make and model of the drive and pull up the manufacturer's website as well. Arnold wants to know, Kerry, will SK Hynix be your Intel NVMe replacement? Maybe. We'll see what happens. All right, I think we're ready for our first power on self-test. I got my little break. Let me plug an HDMI cable into this bad boy. I'm really digging on these super thin HDMI cables. So much easier to work with. Right there. One of the things I do like about the B560 HD3 is how many video outputs it's got. VGA, DVI, DisplayPort, and HDMI. And you can use 2 of these, sometimes 3, depending on the chip, at the same time. And that's based on the chip having an integrated graphics card built right into the CPU. Okay, let's go back over to my OBS settings and bring up the HDMI input and put my main camera here in the corner, like so. Okay, here we go. Flip the switch to on the back of the power supply. Hit the power button. Lights up in blue. CPU fan is turning. Now, the very first boot could take up to 2 minutes. And in fact, the system may seem to be doing nothing but the fan spinning, and then it may appear to shut off and come back on again. And it might do that a couple of times. That's perfectly normal. As you noticed, the Gigabyte logo just came up and then it went away. The reason it went away is the system just reset itself as it's adjusting for the timing that it needs to talk to the RAM and to talk to the CPU. It saves those settings and then restarts again with those settings. So the next time we should see the logo, it should then try to boot. There's nothing to boot from because the NVMe drive is brand new. It's not been partitioned or formatted. So it's going to take us into the BIOS. While we're in the BIOS, it's a good opportunity to see if a new BIOS version is available before we install Windows. There is a new BIOS version on this board. The current version is F13. We're on F7, so we're about 6 versions behind. We don't need the versions in between unless the manufacturer specifically states otherwise. I downloaded the updated BIOS earlier. It's on this flash drive. It's the only thing on this flash drive. This is a little 2 GB flash drive. If you use a flash drive that's too large or has an NTFS format, depending on your motherboard, it may not see it in the BIOS. So preferably you use a really small, cheap flash drive for this process. I'm going to come around and plug the flash drive into any USB port in the back here. Just like that. And we'll give it just a second to initialize, talk to the motherboard and for the motherboard to be able to acknowledge it. And it doesn't really do anything on the screen. We just wait a minute before we try to do the next step. So if I get rid of camera 1 so you can see the entire screen, I'm going to go, where's my mouse? We're going to go to Q-Flash right here, which is, you can click here or hit the F8 button either way. When I hit Q-Flash, update BIOS, click. The only drive that's formatted, partitioned, is that flash drive. And the only thing on the flash drive is that BIOS. So double click on that and it's going to read it to make sure that it can read it and that it's the right BIOS for this motherboard. So if I give that a double click, it says, are you sure? Yes. It's going to check it right now, verify it. On the left side over here, it says, here's what your current BIOS version is and date. Here's the BIOS version you want to go to. You confirm that. If you're worried about the checksum of the file, I don't worry about that. But for people who do, that information is provided. Click right here to start. And now you just have to be patient. This is going to take a couple minutes and you don't want to interfere with it. So avoid playing with the mouse or hitting buttons on the keyboard just for a couple minutes. Not that that would necessarily hurt anything, but it could. You might inadvertently and accidentally cause a reset. If the system resets while it's updating the BIOS, you might make the motherboard dead. Basically, we call it bricking, where the motherboard now behaves exactly the same way as a brick. It's going to be useless to you, and you'll have to send it back to the manufacturer. So it's absolutely critical if you're going to update the BIOS that you have patience and don't interrupt it. So if you're somebody who can't help but fidget, get up and walk out of the room, give it a couple minutes, and then come in and check on it. When it's done, you will be back in the BIOS again, or you will be at a screen that says no bootable device, press any key. Either way, that's telling you the BIOS update is completed. Different motherboards and different BIOSes take a different amount of time. So in this example, if you have a B560 HD3 motherboard from Gigabyte, this is exactly how long it takes. Because my videos are one single take, there's no edits, and everything is done in real time. Yes, it can be a little slow to watch it update the BIOS, but if I edit it and then show, you know, here's where we started, here's where we ended, then when you attempt it and you've never done it before, how do you know if it's taking longer than it should? When do you know to be worried? So by showing it in real time, I think it's more beneficial to the viewer to completely understand what it's supposed to look like, how long it's supposed to take. But different motherboards from different manufacturers may have larger BIOSes, they may have smaller BIOSes. The process is still the same, and the patience is still the same. The amount of time it'll take varies. So on this specific motherboard, this is the amount of time it actually takes to do it. Most other boards are going to be very similar, but some of the higher end boards can take up to 10 minutes, like on the big boards, especially if you're using something like a flashback BIOS on ASUS. It's much slower. And if you're worried about, you know, hearing stories that somebody updated a BIOS and it caused their motherboard to stop working, if you want to put the odds in your favor that you won't have that experience, leave it alone. The impatience that something went wrong might cause something to go wrong that would not have gone wrong. Think about that. Okay, it's about to do its first boot here. The Elgato is the capture card. The Elgato is saying I don't have an HDMI signal. That's because the motherboard has reset itself. And now we're just waiting again, patiently. Don't touch anything. It's still updating that BIOS. The motherboard may shut down and turn off on its own 2 or 3 times. You might see the CPU fans stop and then come back on again. That's all perfectly normal. The fact that you're seeing a black screen is exactly what you're going to see on your monitor when you do this. You know we're still live because I'm talking and you can hear me. And what's going to happen here in a moment, now it looks like it just reset itself again. Still perfectly normal, nothing to worry about. Your monitor might say something like no signal, which this monitor is showing you right now anyway, but yours might actually have it bigger and bolder. And that's normal and to be expected. And when it's done doing whatever it's doing, you'll get the post screen again, the power on self-test screen. And now we're back in the BIOS where we can verify we are now in version F13 of the BIOS. I recommend anytime you update a BIOS, you load the optimized defaults and then save and exit. Just like that. And that's pretty much all there is to it. System's going to boot up one more time with the save default settings. Dave Hall says the time and date says tomorrow. Yeah, you don't have to worry about the time and date. Absolutely unimportant. The time and date were set in Taiwan, in the time zone, and they're obviously a few hours ahead of us. The time and date are going to be set automatically, and I can't emphasize strongly enough that you do not make any attempt to change it. What I'm going to do next, I'm going to step around and take that BIOS flash drive out and grab the Windows 10 Media Installation flash drive here and plug it into one of the blue USB ports, still leaving Ethernet unplugged, and we're going to turn that right back on. And now the only bootable thing it's got is the Windows 10 boot media. So I don't have to go into the BIOS. I don't have to tell it what to boot to. It's gonna, if you just leave the BIOS alone and its defaults, It's going to try and boot to that NVMe drive first. It's not bootable because we haven't partitioned and formatted it. So it's going to then look to the USB. It sees that its USB is bootable, and as you can see on the screen, it has booted to it and begins the Windows 10 installation process. So, one more time, we'll go through this process the same way you always see me do it. So we're going to click Next and Install Now, and it's going to ask us a few more things. It wants a product key. Universally, whether it's Windows 7 or Windows 10 or Windows 11, I always choose during the installation that I do not have a product key. It says, okay, well, when you buy a product key, what version of Windows 10 is it going to be for? It's going to be for Windows 10 Pro. If I install Windows 10 Home, it will not activate with a Windows 10 Pro product key or vice versa. Next, you have to accept the license agreement. You don't have a choice. Next, do you want to do an upgrade or a custom install? Universally, whether it's Windows 7 or 10 or 11, always, 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 I want to do a custom install. And says, where do you want to install it? Well, now it sees our 2 terabyte Samsung 970 EVO Plus. If you're installing more than one drive on your new build, make your life easier and postpone installing any of the other drives, because you might accidentally install Windows to the wrong drive. We only have one drive, so we can't get this wrong. That's the drive I want. I hit Next, and now it's going to partition, format, and copy over the Windows installer files, and then reboot and begin the Windows 10 installation. When it does the first reboot, because the BIOS has been left alone, it's going to then boot to the NVMe drive for the very first time. It will no longer boot from the flash drive. So that's how the Windows 10 installation continues. If the Windows 10 installation starts over, then you've messed with your BIOS boot order and you've prioritized USB boot. And so you're just going to go around in circles, because to continue the next part of the Windows 10 install, we have to boot off of the NVMe drive. Russell Starr says, do you need to disable TPM to prevent automatic upgrade to Windows 11? There's more than one way to do that, Russell. But disabling TPM, which is a requirement for Windows 11, means Windows 11 won't install because you're not compatible with it without the TPM. There's also a group policy editor if you're running a Pro version of Windows. There's a couple of different ways that you can prevent it, and that's just one way. Once Windows 10 installs, once we're done with the installation here, then I'm going to plug the internet cable, the Ethernet cable, back into it, and we're going to go check for Windows updates. When we check for Windows updates, it is going to fix the date and time for us automatically. That's why I'm telling you, don't mess with it. It's the fat fingering of the date that can cause all kinds of problems, that people introduce a change that didn't need to be done, didn't realize that they entered it incorrectly, and now they've got a problem and they don't know why, because they don't realize they fat fingered the date. In most cases, it won't allow an invalid date, but sometimes they do, and then you run into all these weird problems. So my suggestion is, let that happen for you automatically. As we continue our Windows 10 installation, we have to answer a few more questions. So, United States, US, skip any other keyboard layout. I'm going to tell it I don't have internet at this time, otherwise it's going to force me to create an online account, which I don't want to do. So continue with limited setup so we can create that local account, because it's not my machine, this is a customer's machine. I'm just going to put the, let's see, this is going to Randy. So we'll put Randy's name in here, press enter. We'll leave the password blank, press enter. Now, with regards to that time and date, if we want that time and date to be set automatically, we need to leave location setting on. But everything else, we don't need. I mean, you might want it, but I don't want any of this other stuff. Like so, and hit accept. I'm going to hit not now on the Cortana, and now it's just finalizing the installation. And then when it brings us to the desktop, I can take the flash drive out and plug the Ethernet cable in so I get internet. Go to Windows Update, start getting all the updates, and you'll see the date and time will autocorrect. No sense working harder than you need to. Marco says, yeah, like that Y3K issue several months ago for a date that was set into the future. Exactly. That's one example. But it can also, as you're well aware, Marco, it can also affect your ability to browse the internet. So if your date and time are off, even by a few days, you might get errors when loading web pages. And it's as simple as fixing the date and time, and all of a sudden, most users are like, well, how could that possibly have any impact? It's very important for security. So if you just let it stay on automatic and you're not trying to control everything, you're less likely going to have a problem. Now we're at the desktop, and let me go back over here for a second. I want to get rid of that. Get rid of that. And this is just going to bug me until I set those two settings, and it's not plugged into the internet, so there's no page to load, but at least the nag screen goes away. Now let me step around, and I'm going to plug in the Ethernet cable, and we're going to remove the Windows 10 installation flash drive. We're done with it. Here's my Ethernet cable. We'll go ahead and plug that in now. The date and time have already been fixed. Look at that. Dead on perfect. So that happened sooner than I was anticipating. And we're going to go ahead and start our Windows updates. There's going to be a bunch of them. It's going to take a little while. While we're waiting, if you have any questions for me, I'd be happy to take your questions. In fact, I think I'm going to resize these screens a little bit. Let's do this. Let's go full screen here. I'll put this one up here, and then I can do this. Okay. We're about to wrap up this live stream for today. So speak now, or you'll have to wait till next time. If you have a question for me or something you want to let me know, this is the time for us to chat while we wait for the updates. And as we get ready to just start winding things down and wrap up today's broadcast. I like to keep the broadcasts between 90 minutes to 3 hours, and we're just encroaching on 3 hours right now, which I think is a pretty good length of time. Ron Barnish says, check my phone. Okay, good idea. From Wayne Shirley, greetings to you and the community, longtime viewer, recently subscribed. Love all your videos, especially the reasoning and the life lessons. If only all classroom environment was like this. Keep building. Well, thank you, Wayne, for the $15 Amazon gift card. And from Ronald Barnish, $10 Amazon gift card. He says, I sent this with another computer so I don't miss any of your live stream. That's dedication. Well, thank you. Appreciate you. Carlos Hernandez says it was a nice video today. Yeah, things have gone quite well. We've had a real pleasant chat room, which of course I knew as soon as I lock it down to members and moderators for interacting. It reduces the stress of the spammers and the bots and the troublemakers. And I think turning off DVR mode also helped avoid the confusion that was occurring where people were responding to things I did a half hour ago. So that's helped me out personally. Shamim says, if AMD keeps the same chipset, don't you think it can be an advantage in case you want to improve your system in the future? You can use the same motherboard, but then you're limited, right? So if you want to use a 2-year-old motherboard to put a brand new processor in it because you think it's more convenient, then you're really not receiving much of an upgrade at all. The whole reason the motherboards are changing and the chipsets are changing is because they're able to enhance the performance of those items so that everything runs faster, well, in theory, cooler. And so if you're only changing the CPU and you're not changing the board it's on, you're not going to really see much benefit from it at all. It just it's an illusion of an upgrade. It'll make a minor difference. But when you change the chipset and you change the CPU, now suddenly there's a lot more stuff that's going to be faster, especially as we go into, say, DDR5. You're holding yourself back by trying to stay compatible, and that means that any improvement is always going to be minor, and it's going to take you much, much longer to get a performance boost that's possible right now. So I think it's profoundly foolish because technology is evolving at such a rapid rate that, and motherboards are, they're cheap. It's a very minor cost of the overall cost of the system. And overall, it's very rare that anybody upgrades their CPU. So it's really punishment, in my opinion. AMD really shot themselves in the foot by forcing them into that AM4 socket for so long. AMD could be so much better today, so much better if they weren't limited to that AM4 socket that they committed themselves to. And I think that was a massive mistake. It's not as though they have to do one or the other. They could have continued supporting the AM4 socket while at the same time came out with an AM5 socket. And everybody's up in arms. You said it was going to be compatible. Okay, so they make it compatible, and as a result, the performance of their new chips today is hindered by that socket. And I feel bad for all the AMD users that they can't have what AMD is capable of doing because it was so important to so many people that they could simply change out the chip. And as a result, you hindered the ability of what your technology could do by forcing it to have to use the old technology in combination with the new, and the old will always slow up the new. Your system will only be as fast as the slowest component in it. That slowest component slows everything else down. It's kind of like being on a freeway and you've got a Ferrari, but the guy in front of you is driving super slow. You can't drive any faster than the person in front of you. So yeah, I think socket compatibility like that is a terrible blunder on AMD's decision making, and I hope AMD learned their lesson and they won't do it again, because AMD has the ability to make a much, much better chip, but it requires changing the socket. There's a reason why Intel's changing the socket. You're not going to run DDR5. You're not going to have the ability to run more PCI-E lanes. I mean, there's really critical things that you're cut off at the knees. For a component that's $100, $150, seems was just a horrible business decision. And it really hindered AMD's progress. See how we're doing on our updates here. Looks like a video driver went in because everything got super tiny. Good. Everything looks good over there. Barry Klein in the chat room wants to know, does the 970 EVO Plus get the same speed in either slot? It looks like Gen 3, so I guess yes. But you know, like the one closer to the CPU. Yes. Yeah. Gen 4 slot doesn't absolutely have to have a Gen 4 NVMe drive. It's like a USB. If I have a USB 3.0 flash drive, I can plug it into USB 1 or USB 2. It'll just run at whatever speed the plug is. It's backwards compatible. So a Gen 4 NVMe probably will not work at all. I haven't tested it, but I don't think it'll even so much as be recognized if your socket is Gen 3. So you can go backwards for compatibility. You cannot go forwards because they didn't have a crystal ball. Team CompuPro says, what is the estimated price on the setup? $65 for the cooler, $100 for the RAM. I'm just using round numbers. $180 on the NVMe drive, $120 on the motherboard, and about $360, $370, I think, on the CPU. Power supply is about $40. So you add all that up. Of course, we're going to add Wi-Fi, we're going to add a DVD drive, and we're going to put it all in a case, and then we have to pay for shipping, which will be about a little over $100 to pay for both packing, insurance, and shipping via FedEx ground. Overall, just using the onboard video, it's about $1,300 complete. So, you know, this is pretty high end. You know, it's 11900K, which was Intel's flagship consumer processor last year. It's still sold today, and a lot of people buy it. $100 worth of RAM, almost $200 in storage, so that's 300, 600, 700, 65, let's say 780, 820. I feel like I'm forgetting something. Another 20 bucks on a DVD, 25, 820, it's a 850, 900 with the Wi-Fi, another 100 on the case, that's 1,000, 20 bucks for Windows 10 Pro, about $100 to ship, we're at 1120. And I think the CPU, when I bought it, was a bargain at $430, and the price has since gone down about 100 bucks. Am I forgetting a piece? It seems like I'm forgetting a piece somewhere. Dante Charles says, I can't thank you enough for all you do, Uncle Kerry. I appreciate it. Right on, Dante. Thank you. Thank you for saying as much. I appreciate that. What's the difference on an AMD socket AM4? That socket is designed for the amount of data traffic and speeds that the chips they make require. And so as they enhance the chips and the ability, then the socket also has to be able to provide all the extra data for those enhancements. And so each socket is designed to match the compatibility, or capability rather, of the chip itself. And if it doesn't, but it's compatible, it limits what the chip can do because the board is limited. Just take another look here at this update. I think when I get our first reboot here, we'll go ahead and wrap things up. Still, whoops, didn't mean to do that. Still installing. A lot of updates. Any sort of installation errors are normal because it's already installing updates in the background, and then I forced it to go get updates, And so it might have already downloaded and installed some of these updates, and so it'll say error. Nothing to worry about. It's perfectly normal. Once it's ready to restart, we'll check for updates again, and we will repeat this until there's no more updates left. Pending restart, pending install. All right, let's go ahead and restart it now. Shamim wants to know, is an i7 12th gen more powerful than the i9 11th gen? It depends how you're using it. In some cases, one may be slightly faster. In some cases, they may be identical. In other cases, it really depends if it's a certain kind of application and how it's being used. You can go into Google and you can search i9 11 900K space versus, or simply VS space, and then any model of chip you want to compare it against. And in the first link there, we'll show you the results. And it's an overwhelming amount of information. But see for yourself. You can do the same exact thing if you want to compare one video card against another video card. And then depending on how you're using your system and how much the cards are, you make the decision that's right for you. So in the way that you use it, one may be faster than the other, but in the way I use it, it may be the opposite. Depends on what exactly we're comparing. A lot of people are oversimplifying the technology as though one is just truly faster than the other. And in some cases that's true when there's an extreme difference between the chips, especially over a period of time. But when we're talking about chips that have only released a couple of months apart, the differences are relatively minor from evolution to evolution. And the more generations you go ahead and compare against, the more benefit you see. Just kick off these updates once again. Actually, you know what? This resolution at 4K is just way too tiny. Super tiny. So small it's hard to see. There we go. Now we should be 1920 by 1080. That looks better. And then back over to continue our Windows updates. Install now. Panadoglius Gramolopoulos says, Carrie, I think the AM5 socket will be LGA, and that's a big change for AMD. Oh, I hope so. Yeah, having the pins on the CPU is terrible. You know, try and take the heatsink off, and then it rips the CPU right from the socket, bends the pins. Much prefer the pins in the socket. Patrick Rousseau says, I want to thank everyone again for the warm birthday wishes. It's very much appreciated. Yeah, well, one more time, happy birthday to Patrick, and hope you're having a good day today. Mike Perodin says, good and nice job. How is the dog? And Mimi says hello. Hello to Mimi. Dogs are doing fine. And hopefully we'll get a visit from them in Studio A on Sunday. I'll do a live broadcast in the afternoon. Not exactly dialed in a time yet. and hopefully Mitch will join me, and it'll be myself and Mitch back in the kitchen in Studio A and have a little fun nostalgia like the old days. Patrick's birthday was actually yesterday, not today, but that's okay. You should have the whole weekend as a birthday weekend. Okay, well, I think that's going to wrap it up for us for today. Everything's looking like it's pretty routine at this point forward. And let me turn that off in OBS there. I didn't realize I left camera 3 input turned on. Not that it mattered, but. And then I just want to take another look here where we're at on these updates. 73% on that one. Okay, you know what's going to happen. We're just going to wait for that to finish, restart, and go back. I'll get the Intel driver update assistant, put that on there, get those updated. Samsung NVMe driver, Samsung Magician software. I put VLC on it. I go through the installed apps, take out the ones that defaulted with the Windows install that I think are safe to remove, and make sure all the drivers are up to date. I'll run Uncle Carrie's Windows 10 optimizer on it. Then I'll get a Corsair 200R, put it all in the case, along with the DVD drive, power supply, the Wi-Fi card, cable manage it, and that'll take a couple days. And then we'll get it shipped out to Randy in Missouri, probably at the end of next week, I'm guessing, if all goes well. But you can see no dent on arrival parts. That's pretty normal, pretty rarely happens. And if you follow the steps as I show them, you should expect a similar experience. If you're buying your parts off of eBay or some shady website or some manufacturer no one's ever heard of, it may be that the troubles you run into aren't because you did something wrong, but that you made a very poor choice for steering away from certain parts, that you were guided by price, and now you're more than likely going to pay in a different way. And in those situations, usually once you get the problem resolved, a problem you would have never had if you hadn't have gone cheap, you'll likely experience another problem and another problem and another problem and another problem. And then the next time you build a computer, you won't want to do that to yourself again for saving 20 or 30 bucks or taking the risk to get the part off of eBay. Get it new, get it from a reputable seller, like for example, Amazon or Newegg. We have a good return policy, and you know you're not overpaying at those sites. Those sites are always selling at a competitive price. When you're trying to get that price cheaper at a certain level, I can almost guarantee you're going to pay in ways you haven't imagined yet, and it ain't worth it. So thank you to everybody who has contributed for all the Amazon gift cards, for the Super Chat contributions. Thanks to all of you. Thanks for joining me today. I hope you enjoy the rest of your Friday. Thanks to Camera Girl for the close-ups. Great work, Camera Girl. That's going to wrap it up for me for today. And I'll send a notification out as soon as I have a time dialed in on Sundays, so watch for that. I hope you'll join me then. Join me and Mitch. Looking for an outro I can play. Yeah, we'll do the dubstep outro. Thanks for watching. I'll see you all again very, very soon. Bye for now.